live, so we are ready to go.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining in. I facilitate meetings for a living now, so it's just fun to be able to facilitate another meeting. Let's go ahead and call the roll if you would, Remy.
Sure, of course. Okay, we have, excuse me. Okay, Angie Blackwell.
I'm here.
Katie Brooks.
I'm present.
Peter Buckley.
Here.
And might I add that Peter Buckley is the acting chair for today. Peter Buckley. Ann Kubich is going to be a couple of minutes late, so she will be joining us soon. George Mendoza.
Here.
Peg Miller.
Here.
Our chair, Sue Miller, is currently on vacation, so she is excused today. And then Cleethorn Ladd will be joining us a little bit later at 1 p.m. And then from there, we have our agency leads, Pat Allen from OHA.
Here.
Colt Gill from the Oregon Department of Education.
Here.
Liesl Wendt from the Oregon Department of Human Services.
Here.
Andrea Bell from Oregon Housing and Community Services will be joining us today as well for the first time. So we look forward to welcoming her. And finally, we have Alyssa Chatterjee, the Early Learning System Director.
Here.
Thank you. And we have a quorum, Chair Buckley.
Remy, it looks like Ann Kubich has joined us too.
Sorry to be late, everybody. I apologize.
No worries.
No worries.
Thank you, Ann.
I'm a little down with COVID, so nothing is quite working for me.
Oh my.
Sorry.
Well, hope you feel better soon.
Thanks.
So the first item on the agenda is a reflection on the Oregon Department of Education's presentation from last month. And if you're like me, I'm trying to think, what was the presentation last month? So I know, was Harriet going to talk us through that, Remy, or maybe Colt could even remind us what the presentation was last month.
Colt can definitely remind us, and I am pulling up the slides from last month's meeting right now.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
I also don't have the slides in front of me. It was a long time, and we're still in COVID time. But we talked about several topics related to the goals, related to the kindergarten assessment, to early intervention and early childhood special education, related to funds that the districts have from federal COVID relief that can cross over into spending in early learning areas that school districts participate in. There were a couple of questions that came up that I can report back on if that's helpful to get us started.
That'd be great.
Okay. So one of those came from you, Acting Chair Buckley, which was related to the community mental health navigator pilot program that we're operating. So that we're doing that work through a federal grant. We've applied for another federal grant to expand that work beyond the 4 areas where it's currently located. And if we get the other grant, we'll learn about that in September, and we'll start partnering with more communities and school districts in October. And that will carry that work through 2027. We're also reaching out to the legislature with the beginnings of this work and asking that they pick up support once we've reached the end of the federal resources for this. So we'll see if it grows at that point. But we do have the 4 regions right now. We have a region in the North Willamette Valley, Southern Willamette Valley, Southern Oregon. So we need to connect with you definitely, but currently have been working with Charlie Bauer and then some folks, Brent Berry and others at Phoenix Talent School District. But need to pull you in and let you know what's happening there. And then a program in Central Oregon as well. So these are all communities that already have a strong history of community engagement. We're able to pull together partners to the table and allow us to bring in the resources we have to support what they're doing. A lot is what you're doing at Southern Oregon Success. tied to our model of integrated mental health that is focused in 4 tiers. We had Grace talk a little bit about this, but strengths-based, trauma and social emotional learning informed, and equity centered. And I'll be happy to share more in writing if that's helpful. The other question came from Council Member Ladd. And if I can share screen for just a minute, I'll walk through what will be available soon, and we'll get this, when this is up and running fully, we'll get this link to Remy so she can share with all of you. Let's see, am I sharing the right screen? Hang on just a second. Okay, hopefully you see a dashboard that says elementary and secondary school emergency relief. Okay. So this was a question of, can we tell where school districts are spending their federal relief dollars by grade level? And we can't down to the exact grade level, but you can see quite a bit about how school districts are spending their funding with this tool. And this will be live on our website in a week or two. And again, I'll get the link to Remy so she can share with you. But basically, you can see from each of the funds that the state has received for education, we have a tracker here that allows anyone to see what the districts have claimed for their funds for reimbursement and how they're spending those dollars. So if I just jump into this first one here for ESSER 1 funds, and that you can see that most of these funds have been spent down by the school districts. There are some funds remaining, so there are still some districts that have some spending that they could do here. You could see on this chart that Annex School District has $6,000 more. Athena Weston has about $30,000 more that they can spend or claim. One thing we need to be clear on is that the districts may have spent dollars that they have not yet claimed from ODE. So there's always that possibility. We can jump in and get more detail, so we can look at a specific district. So I can highlight Beaverton here and note that they received about $4.7 million in these ESSER 1 funds. And they've spent all of those, have claimed all of those funds. We can get more of a detail and see how exactly did they expend those dollars. And we can do this by district, or this is all the claims for ESSER 1. So we can see that of those ESSER 1 funds, about 22 million were spent specifically at the elementary level, about 4 million at the middle school level, and then high school programs, about 5 million, pre-kindergarten, so early learning programs, 59,000 in this first set. This was the smallest allocation that we had.
Right.
You can look through and see the areas where they spent. You can see where those funds were, what they were expended on. So salaries for staff or materials. And you can do this by district as well. So we could go down and select, for example, Beaverton School District, and you can get a sense of where they spent their funds. So again, we'll have this available to everyone, and then you can take a look at how the districts are spending dollars in each of those ESSER COVID relief funds. And I think those were my only 2 questions. So
Liesl did put a comment in the chat. Just want to acknowledge the events of yesterday, offer support to teachers and school staff.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. I'll drop a link in the chat to some information that we shared out with school districts yesterday related to that event as well.
Very good. And George is asking for a link to the website that you just showed us on the ESSER funds.
Yep, it's not live yet, so later this week or early next week, we should have this live, and we'll send it to Remy, and then she'll send it out. And for George, for K-12 school district superintendents, you'll all get a link to it as well.
Very good. Any questions from anyone on the 2 items that Colt covered? Appreciate the information. Andrea, good to see you. Welcome. Glad to have you here.
Morning. Good to be here.
Remy, I think you might have the outline of the presentation, just so we can kind of get a refresher on the other items that were covered last month.
Yeah, and we'd love to talk about what more we'd like to dive in on. We're looking in our planning team to schedule a second deep dive with the Oregon Department of Education because they had so many interesting programs. So let's start chatting.
So I did think the student success plans were great to get the information on. Great to see how it's detailed out. Any other thoughts from council members? Where would you like to dig deeper? When I've mentioned the work on the kindergarten assessment to the folks that I'm working with here, there was tremendous interest in the kindergarten
Yeah.
assessment.
Yeah.
No surprise. And a offer from our early learning hub when we have our next preschool K-12 summit on August 11th, and they would love to have someone from ODE as part of the summit to check in and maybe get some feedback from people as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interest in the kindergarten assessment from everybody. So yeah, that's great.
Any other questions from me?
The only other comment I have is about the early intervention and kind of the workforce dilemma that we have with providing services to kids. I think we're getting better at identifying those kids, but it's much more difficult to actually provide services, just again, because of the lack of trained individuals to do that.
Pat, did you have something you want to add?
Yeah, it's just an area that I would suggest that it would be good to spend some more time on, if not today, at some point, is the issue. Here it's in the context of student success plans, but I think it's a little bit broader around LGBTQ2SIA plus students. I fear that this is the next target area from a socio-political standpoint. In addition to kind of the false narrative around critical race theory, and in the wake of what's likely to come with Roe v. Wade, I think this is a political organizing target that I think we're going to need a pretty thought out response to protect some incredibly vulnerable kids in a dynamic that's going to be really, really threatening. I think so. I would like to see us spend more time on that if we're able to do that.
It's a great comment. And I just want to note that Katie also backed Peg's in the chat, backed Peg's idea that we really to look into the challenges in terms of services we can identify, but do we have the resources to actually serve families? Colt, did you have something you wanted to add in?
Yeah, just responding to both of those. I think those are both good topics going forward. What Pat brought up is clearly a very challenging topic in schools right now. We are regularly being confronted with challenges around what we already provide in support of our LGBTQ2SIA plus student and family community and staff community. And we have a number of efforts underway. This is the first year that House Bill 52 related to the LGBTQ2SI Student Success Plan is underway. So we're beginning to fill that advisory group. Some of our members are being challenged by other community in Oregon for participating on that advisory group. We're seeing a number of challenges related to implementation of the Menstrual Dignity Act here in Oregon. And we are partnering with Pat and his team on some supports for youth. We're also partnering with the governor and her team on some additional supports for transgender students. And you'll see more on both of those coming out in June. But I think that that would be a good topic for us to consider working through together some. And then the workforce issue, that's real. I mean, your council talks about that frequently. I think one thing to add to that is that we did make it clear to school districts who received about $78 million in funding to work on recruitment and retention efforts through this next school year, from now through the next school year, through House Bill 4030. We made it clear in the guidance that they could also use those funds in their early learning sectors. So for their own pre-kindergarten, preschool programs, and for EIECSE programs as well. The ESDs, who oftentimes are the operators for EIECSE, also receive those funds. So we made it clear to them that they can spend it on pre-kindergarten staffing as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Colt. I agree. It'd be good to dig into both of those. And I was kind of alarmed to see that recently social emotional learning has become a target as well. I don't know whether the department has talking points for districts or messaging for districts in terms of being able to talk about the programs that they're offering, why they're offering, etc. But we'd love to go into that. I just want to note Liesel's comment in the chat about the best ways to engage families. Can we coordinate how we do family engagement? That would be a great subject for us to focus on. It might actually come to the Early Learning Council, because we do have the benefit of having agency directors with this council and being able to have that discussion on how we can coordinate family engagement. George, you have your hand up there?
Yeah. You know, piggybacking and then adding to on some of the comments. So definitely the workforce pathway development at the high school level, getting it a little bit more entrenched with what we could do, and service providers that want to partner with universities as well as high schools to be able to have those types of job experiences and work shadow opportunities. I also think that if you're going to do that, you know, I'll just build more teachers or build more support, you're going to have to figure out compensation and benefits as well, that to make it a little bit more rewarding, more incentivizing for people. I also believe that in terms of having, I'll just say more, you probably need to expand facilities, or you have to have funding for facilities. And if that is collaboration with schools with empty classrooms, or schools with classroom space, or organizations that have classroom space, if you're going to have more teachers and you're going to have more locations, you're going to have a facilities plan as well. And so those are things for me that I don't know if we still have like solid answers to, but I feel like some of that needs to also be a focus. As it relates to early learning hubs, I do feel like that's the group that has the connection and the network to be able to work with K-12 schools, or at least K-2 settings, and have more support in terms of what are we doing with numeracy, what are we doing with literacy, what are we doing with behavior, what are we doing with regulation, what are we doing with parent involvement and communication, how can we help one another so that both of our needs are met, or that we're at least collaborating and sharing our experiences so that we can increase learning opportunities for children and families. Those are things to me that I know we're trying to do, and I'm sure that we're doing them. My hope is that we can just keep doing those things well. For me also, I'll just say, as a superintendent, on the data on the Kinder assessment, I'll be interested to know more about the results and what those results mean, basically before Kinder, and then during Kinder and after Kinder. So it's nice to get all this stuff, but it'll really be important. Like, so what do we do with it? You know, what are the next steps? How do we improve programs before, and how do we improve, I'll just say the K-12 education system, but specifically the primary system. I tend to think, like, for me, numeracy, literacy, growth motor, fine motor, how to be regulated, how to build relationships, how to follow expectations or directions, how to be responsible. Those are all kinds of things that are very important once you get to a school. And schools to me are a little bit different than preschools. And I think people need to keep remembering both sides. I've come to terms with both machines are not the same. One serves 570,000 in a state, one serves about 10,000 in the state, and we all have different staffing and staffing ratios and policies and rules and And sometimes I think people need to understand those things as well.
Thanks, George. Angie, did you want to add some comments?
Thank you, Peter. I actually was going to talk about kinder assessment, but after you brought up social emotional learning, I'm really passionate about this topic, and I think it's extremely important that we in the state get out in front of this attack on social emotional learning, because there has been no time that it was more important than now, as children and families struggling through the crisis of this pandemic. We're seeing greater and greater need for social emotional learning supports in schools. And I too have seen, I've wondered, how did this become a target? How could this be a bad thing? And I'm really anxious to get out in front of that that steamroller that's coming down the hill. So on kindergarten assessment, I just wanted to say I really appreciate the change of the name from kindergarten readiness assessment to kindergarten assessment. And that is all. Thank you.
Thanks, Angie. Katie, did you have some comments?
Yeah. As the school district looks at the workforce issue, and I see this as all the way from early learning, childcare to graduation, and retaining a workforce that are helping our kids. One of the things that I think is going to be really tough to do is figure out something that actually keeps folks in this workforce pipeline, attracts them, and then retains them. One of the things that we've been toying with in our area is this notion of how inaffordable housing is and how that directly relates to the happiness, well-being, and retention of really fantastic teachers and employees. And I know this is difficult, but I really, really wish the state could start looking at their land as an asset for workforce retention and put deed restrictions on that and build housing. We're doing some projects, we're hoping here in Bend, that are deed restricted through a nonprofit called CORE, and they're accessible to folks who work for the school district. And it works better with, it's a different deal with rents versus home ownership, but there's kind of a place for both. One's a little more complicated than the other. But I guess the bottom line is people need a place to live. And if there is a way to build in some of that, I think it builds in loyalty and just takes a big burden off teachers' shoulders. And I think it is directly related to the quality of care and the quality of teaching. If we look at that as holistically as we can as state landowners, and also as a entity that's responsible for hiring and retaining a workforce.
It's a really fascinating idea. Katie, is the project that you're working on now, is it on state land?
Yep.
Wow.
State land that was purchased with the stipulation that there's a certain percentage of affordable, big A, certain percentage of attainable workforce, which is AMI, I want to say 80 to 100. And in Bend, that's people who are making close to $70,000 to $80,000. And so it's going to be home ownership, but on deed restricted property. So you will own the building, but the land underneath it is going to be retained for use for folks who work in the school district.
Interesting.
So I think we need to get creative on this, because I just see such a direct correlation between people's well-being and their ability to do their job, specifically in industries like teachers, who are already just trying to break even when housing prices are far outpacing income. That is a fundamental thing I think the state of Oregon could do to figure out how to keep really great people. And it wouldn't cost anything necessarily.
Interesting. I seem to remember a story out of Palo Alto, California, about a decade ago, where they actually were buying up real estate for teachers. They couldn't.
Land banks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Interesting.
It's doable. There's some tricky parts, it's not all roses, but it's just something that we've been really taking a look at here pretty hard. And I just encourage, if there's any way, Colt, that you and your group could look into that. I know that Division of State Lands is involved in there's many players in this, but I think it would be really helpful.
You're getting a nod of the head from Colt there. And a smile from Andrea. So hopefully we'll see some forward movement. That's a great idea, Katie. Any other thoughts on the what ODE presented last month, or these different ideas that have come up in this conversation?
I was wondering, Peter, if folks had thoughts on just where we see the greatest connection to the work of the Early Learning Council and where the ELC can really provide support. I don't know, Colt, if there's some areas that really spring to mind for you, but as we think about all the work ODE is doing and the clear connections, I think Liesel's comment is a great example. Where can the Early Learning Council really provide some leverage and leadership?
I think, Alyssa, one area we didn't touch on heavily last time that I would add to the list. I think some of the areas we did talk about, EI, ECSE, KA, all of those are still ripe for ongoing conversation, and the workforce issues. But another one is related to the SEL thinking that has come up this morning. The two organizations have been taking a look at the early learning kindergarten guidelines, which are heavily focused around social emotional learning, especially as the department is in the middle of implementation of its part of House Bill 2166, which creates social emotional learning standards for K-12 schools. That we want to make sure that we stay in close contact with the Early Learning Division, or DELC, in the future, so that as they're created from kindergarten on up, that they continue to be closely aligned with early learning and early learning programs. And I think that is a place where we can focus on. I remember the process that created that first set of guidelines. There were meetings held around the state with early learning providers and kindergarten teachers in spaces together, helping to inform that process. And I think that we'll need to go back to something similar to that as we move forward. So that would be another area where I would just name that would be good to continue to stay in close alignment. Thanks, Colt.
Yeah, I do note both Pat and Colt had additions in the chat talking about the housing ideas. I love it's interesting to me, we have several different districts that have gone through remodels recently, and the question came up, like, can the districts hold on to those modular classrooms and use them for homes for teachers is an amazing idea. Any other thoughts on anything related to Oregon Department of Education? If not, we'll move on then to our next item on the agenda. Thank you, everyone, for those comments. And Katie, really thank you for that provocative idea. It's really got my mind going. So hopefully we can move into that area of thought as well. Next up on the agenda is the highlight on the Oregon Early Learning Division program and initiatives. So I'll toss it over to Alyssa.
Thanks, Peter. I'm going to do a little bit of vamping while the rest of the team hops on. But so today we were really going to kind of focus on what's happening on professional learning in the program end of things. I know you've been hearing a lot about the Department of Early Learning and Care. And while that is a lot of work we're doing, there's plenty of other work that is still going on. And so wanted to kind of give a spotlight to that. While we're waiting for folks, I wasn't sure, Andrea, if you wanted to kind of jump in and introduce yourself, and if you had any reflections or hopes as you're sort of joining this council for the first time.
Well, no, I appreciate it. And certainly good morning. It's good to be at the virtual table and be in virtual community with everyone. I would say, just to start off, I think it was reflected in the chat, but it's probably just worth elevating for collective consciousness and grounding around probably the heartbreak that so many of us are feeling, experiencing, just with the many events that have continued to happen across our nation, and it's palpable and very real. And so I just want to elevate that. But yeah, Andrea Bell, she, her pronouns. I'm the Executive Director of Oregon Housing and Community Services. I will just say really briefly, Elisa, just a couple of things to highlight is, you know, I think we maybe have elevated this before and certainly want to keep this group engaged. Is from a housing perspective, it's been really interesting because I think Katie and others have mentioned some really important facets as we think about our housing crisis that has continued to plague so many Oregon communities. And one of the matters sort of top of mind for our agency is, as we continue to really work on the production of affordable housing, truly affordable housing, is also reframing sort of our role and public impact role as we think about place-based initiatives. For a housing finance agency that is working on both production of affordable housing, access to home ownership, because that's how you build wealth. That is the reality of how you build wealth. And as, you know, certainly as someone who came to the States and as a young child, I know that was always the dream for my family, was being able to have access to both affordable housing and home ownership, but also thinking more broadly around not only the social determinants of health, but also recognizing that many adults who either experience homelessness or housing instability also had very similar experiences to that as a child. And so one of the bodies of work that we want to engage this council in is certainly around our work around co-location. And so this is really sort of emerging affordable housing and early childhood learning centers as part of those. Now, when we've mentioned that in the past, people have been like, you guys are not, you know, childcare experts, and we are not and will not claim to be, but we know people who are experts in that space. And it is both these types of integrated models that we'll need to continue to think about. And then, of course, is what Katie mentioned around models that are not new and that have been effective around creating affordable housing for teachers who are on the front line of serving community through our youth. So certainly that is one of the top areas, Elisa, that I would want to just elevate for consciousness as we keep engaged. And then also just knowing that we're going to have to think creatively around production of affordable housing and the types of models as we think about serving holistically and serving our youth and keeping our racial justice frame in mind beyond words of solidarity, but through affirmative action in our commitments. So I'll yield back for now, Lisa, but just wanted to provide that very brief context.
Thank you so much. And Lisa, thank you for making an offer and having Andrea talk to us for a little bit. Appreciate that.
No, thank you, Andrea. I'll give you all a quick update on the Department of Early Learning and Care before we pivot into what is happening with our program implementation and with our professional learning implementation. And what you're going to see here is really just a quick overview of sort of the key milestones for where we are in this project as we think about all the work ahead. And I will make sure I'm sharing the right screen with you all. There we go. So this is sort of a high level view of what is happening, what we're thinking about in terms of the work ahead. So we have these sort of high level agency milestones that you see here, where we're looking at return to office. We're looking at some key legislative dates coming up with emergency board, and of course the 23 session, creating our 5-year strategic plan for the Department of Early Learning and Care, which feels really critical as you all as the council look at the next version of Raise Up Oregon. Some of the technical work on collective bargaining agreements and negotiations with staff, and really being prepared for that July 1, 2023 launch. We've also got some breakdowns in those back office functions. So this is our Chief Operating Officer team, where we have stood up our human resources team. I believe we have one position left, but we have been making great strides in getting that team stood up to help us hire the the 86 positions we received in the February session. We're in the process of building our accounting and budget team with goals of having those teams really ready and stood up by this fall, as well as finishing out our IT team. There have been a lot of great hires happening there. And then our procurement team, having them solidly in place no later than January 1 of next year. On the chief of staff, an area we've really been focused on is standing up our project management office. This is where the strategic projects will reside, and it's been a big support and driver of just the DELC implementation project and the 45 projects associated with it. This is also where our communications team lives and where we'll be building our data analytics and quality assurance teams and really looking at that matrix approach of providing cross-agency support to the entire agency and trying to de-silo ourselves internally. A lot of work on the employment-related daycare migration. We are moving the Inclusive Partners program over, and this is going to be a great, I think, pilot for the work that needs to happen from a change management perspective and from just a system integration perspective. As well as looking at school age rulemaking, which we'll hear about more later, and then looking at that July 123 date to actually move these teams and associated functions to the new agency, including working with the Department of Human Services and figuring out what pieces need to stay with ODHS while we build some systems and sort of the long-term planning there. We also on the IT front have some really critical IT systems. So in addition to just building our team, we need to have that core IT infrastructure. Right now, we're doing things like migrating to new servers and looking at establishing our help desk functions and some of that day-to-day support work. And then there's the stuff that I know you're all interested in, like a new grants management system, like a provider management system, and making sure that we have improved provider payment supports and we have strong interfaces as we separate from the Department of Education for folks to draw down their funds and still have access to receiving resources in a timely way, and launching our website. So this work is all underway right now with goals of having them ready in the spring of 23 for launch on July 1 of 2023. And then just wanted to lift up some key leadership hires. So while we're not anticipating having some of these teams like the budget and accounting team fully staffed until the fall, we are starting to hire those leaders to build those teams. And we're making tremendous headway there. And if anyone is interested in sharing positions or learning more, happy to share more information, but looking towards hiring an IT operations manager, accounting manager. We have our new Deputy Director of Chief of Programs, Serena Stoudemire, starting next week, bringing on some lean leader capacity for project management support, as well as budget rules support. Our procurement director, Brenda Pearson, will be starting on June 1st as well. And then we're currently in the process of recruiting for a tribal affairs director. So just wanted to kind of share those with you all so you can kind of see where we are in the process and sort of where we're headed as we go forward. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that.
Any questions for anyone for what Alyssa covered? I have a couple. Oh, I think Katie has one. Maybe no. That was your hand up, Katie. It's not. So Alyssa, two things. The Inclusive Partners Program. Can you tell me what that is?
Sure. So the Inclusive Partners Program, we actually got a presentation from them this morning at our all-staff meeting. They partner with TANF Jobs, TANF Childcare, and employment-related daycare subsidy providers for the high needs rate. So supporting programs who are serving children with special needs and receiving the high needs rate through those childcare subsidy programs. So they provide on-site technical assistance, support, coaching. And while the high needs rate is only associated with those childcare subsidy programs, the technical assistance, coaching, training, partnership with childcare resource and referral entities is available across the state to all providers. So we're really excited for this team to join the early learning division. They're actually going to be joining John's team, who you'll hear from in a minute. And we see a lot of opportunity to integrate them with our professional learning structure and provide some ongoing supports and kind of targeted strategies to continue to promote inclusive settings in childcare going forward.
Nice, thank you. And then on the hiring front, do you have an IT person? Did you hire one, or are you getting applications? I know that's a hard position to fill.
It is. IT is going well so far. Our Chief Information Officer, Jared Chalk, has been just rolling. And so we are getting really strong IT applicants. I don't believe we've made an offer just yet on the IT manager, but recruitment pools are looking pretty good. I think where we're having the most difficulty, and we're not alone in this, is on the procurement and budget accounting fronts. We're doing the agency swaps and just taking from each other's teams. And so those are the teams that we're anticipating will take the most time to fully stand up.
Great, thank you. Katie.
In reading some of the comments from the family listening sessions and just thinking about DELC development, have you gotten any feedback, Alyssa, from providers out there on what they may be worried about or what their hopes are that might change having everything under one roof? Is there any, I know we've talked off and on about this, but as you're starting to form the department and putting the pieces together, is there anything that's sticking out to you that is coming from the providers themselves?
So we're actually just getting ready to launch our mission, vision, values work. So we're starting with a survey, but we're going to be bringing together some focus groups to really hear from providers and from families, sort of what their expectation is from us as an agency. When they think about engaging with the state, what do they want that relationship to look like? What do they expect from us? What services do they want to receive? What supports do they want to receive? So not saying, here's the mission, vision, values, please wordsmith, but really trying to get at the core of expectations going forward. And so I'm really, really excited for this work to get underway and have kind of that dedicated forum. We hold, we've switched from monthly to bi-monthly engagements, but we meet with providers every other month. And this has sort of been a running topic. Given everything else providers are experiencing, you know, the COVID pandemic isn't done, as I'm sure Pat could talk at length about, as well as just the baby formula shortages, the lack of compensation, just everything they're dealing with. They're really focused on kind of the immediates. And so getting their reflections on sort of what's to come and what's to expect, we want to be really intentional about.
Thanks, Alyssa. Any other questions? All right, Alyssa, just who are you going to toss it over to?
Yes, thank you. So I think John has joined. So I will hand it over to John to talk about professional learning, and then we'll hear from Gwen about our program structure. And if I got that order wrong, then Gwen, please jump in if you were hoping to start.
I believe John's up first. I think that was the decision. Yeah.
I was hoping that was the case. I wouldn't want to start a fight or anything. No. Thank you, Chair Buckley and members of the council. For the record, I'm John Reeves. I'm the Community System Team Manager at the Early Learning Division. And I just really want to thank you for the opportunity for my team to be able to give a bit of an update on our professional learning and workforce development strategies. We've selected a few key initiatives to provide an overview of, and we can return at a later Early Learning Council meeting to share more comprehensively. And you'll see in a future slide here that we've got a lot going on. And so I do have some team members here to help present today, and we'll highlight some of our professional learning strategies. Oh, and I should probably share my screen because I'm looking at something and you're not. So, am I sharing something that says professional learning system?
Yes.
Okay, that's good news. Okay. Apologies here, trying to move you guys so I can see you. All right. Okay. So the work we're highlighting is guided by the early childhood professional learning plan. And I'm not sure, Remy, did that get provided as a resource to the council? I can provide a link if not.
We will send out the link.
Excellent. I'll make sure that you have that. So that professional learning plan was submitted to the legislature in January of 2020. It's a report that catalogs what professional learning practices were being conducted at the time, and it also identifies how to address the gaps to create a comprehensive and coordinated system with resources from the Student Success Act. And today we can only highlight a few of the system strategies, but we'll provide an overview of these 4 supports for infant toddler educators to provide quality care for our youngest children. We'll talk a little bit about the Early Learning System Initiative at Oregon State University, and specifically our coaching model development. And then the approach that we're taking to revise our quality recognition and improvement system, also known as SPARK, to be more equitable, accessible, and engaging for early educators and their continuous improvement. And lastly, we'll give an overview of our approach to building pathways for the early care and education workforce to achieve higher education opportunities. And so real briefly, just want to be able to connect the dots for you for those 4 things that we'll highlight. This framework is part of the professional learning plan. It includes system strategies to support and incentivize people, and especially people of color, to come into the profession, to ensure early educators are knowledgeable and skilled to create the environments that children truly need. Providing access to degrees, credentials, ongoing professional learning. It also means that organizational support, such as knowledgeable leaders and administrators, are coupled with healthy, supportive workplace practices, and so that those things are in place, which promotes the right opportunities for a practice environment to be successful, so that early educators are able to demonstrate their expertise and feel good about the difference that they're making for children. And so this is the framework that I was just referring to shows up in this professional learning cycle. This cycle is from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. It's the Transforming the Workforce for Children Birth to 8, but it was also referenced in that professional learning plan. And this graphic is an important thing to discuss even more fully than we're going to do today, but I'm providing it as a visual so you can see that in order to have a highly effective workforce, we have to have strategies that address each of these green categories here. So as we're looking at these categories, each strategy that we're implementing is rooted in best practice, developing quality professional learning opportunities for the workforce at all levels, focused on building competencies for administrators, for coaches, consultants, technical assistance providers, and especially our early educators. And it's in all types of childcare, family childcare to center-based, and our publicly funded programs. And so we're creating opportunities to develop skills and practice, supporting the well-being of early educators so that they are in the mindset to build highly effective relationships with families, with children and other professionals, which leads to better child outcomes. And then the cycle continues. It's a continuous quality improvement cycle for ourselves as we're working on these strategies and building effective pathways for our early educators. And so each of those green boxes that was on that last slide are now in these colored sections. So the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 represents each or one of those green boxes. And so what I'm showing you here is an opportunity to see that each of those bullet points is a system strategy or a funded service that's culminating towards the comprehensive approach that we're building for professional learning. And so our team would be happy to return to a council meeting to provide insight into these other components within our professional learning system. We've provided you with the slides so you can take a little deeper analysis of these items here if you want to know what we're doing in these areas. But today we're going to talk about those 4 previously mentioned categories. And I'm going to start by turning it over to Liz Zinter to introduce herself for the record and present on the infant toddler quality strategies.
Thanks, John. Hi, Chair Buckley and members of the council. I am Liz Zinter. I'm the infant toddler specialist here at the ELD on the professional systems community or learning systems team. I'm going to talk about infant toddler strategies today. And as John mentioned, it's really, we have used relational strategies. Infants and toddlers as a relational field. And what we have is 19 infant toddler specialists across the state who I help support, who in turn support providers. There are four of those are bilingual English and Spanish speaking specialists, and they work across 14 CCR in our regions. We're working on hiring for one of our regions currently as well. And what the infant toddler specialists do, they have supportive infant toddler focused networks. Currently we have 17, and those over the past year have served over 170. And I think it's a pretty high number, over 170 early educators, because that's just counting program sites. It doesn't count if multiple folks from one site are engaged in the network. And so they provide these infant toddler focused networks to those providers. So it's a monthly meeting, and there's a monthly training as well. And they provide one-on-one consultation, both scheduled and on an ongoing basis. And that's at least monthly. And currently they are beginning on-site visits as well to provide further supports to the sites. In addition to these networks, they are going into work with providers who may not be engaged in a network, who might just be starting out and wanting some support through the process of how do I begin serving infants and toddlers? How do I navigate the challenges of that? And so these infant toddler specialists are really looked to as community experts to help support that, navigating those systems for providers. And the next slide. Do I move the slides, or is that you, John?
I moved it. Did it not move?
Didn't move.
What's that mean? Let me, somehow it paused share. Let's see.
There you go.
There.
All right, there we go. Sorry about that.
Thanks. So being highly relational, of course, I reached out to the infant toddler specialists and asked for some quotes from them directly from the field and the work that they're doing. And I'll just highlight a few of these because I know that we're short on time. The first I wanted to highlight was Washington County. One of our specialists out there, she's worked with more than 2 providers, but she's worked with 2 providers in particular over the past year who have opened centers, which is a huge accomplishment. And within that first year, they were voted the best childcare in Hillsborough. And so I think that really speaks to the high quality work that these infant toddler specialists are doing. So I wanted to highlight that one. As well as the Gorge, the infant toddler specialist worked with 2 Spanish-speaking family childcare programs, and they both received star ratings. Again, she's worked with more than 2, but we wanted to highlight these 2. And they are the first Spanish-speaking programs in the region to achieve that. And so that was a pretty huge deal for that community as well. I encourage you to look at the other quotes as well to see kind of some of the work that we're doing in the infant toddler world. And there's much more than I could fit on slides, but just wanted to highlight some of these for you all as well. Next slide, John. Yay, it moved. Okay, that's good. Okay, so these are some of the professional development supports that have been provided to the infant toddler specialists. And so we have a monthly infant toddler specialist community of practice where they're able to network with their peers and receive professional learning supports. And then we've just recently started a foundations community of practice for newer specialists. They work with myself and their peers as well to kind of learn what this work is and get some more basic supports, as well as learning from those who have been in the field doing this work, tips and tricks, and get them connected, because it can be in some of our rural communities, they're working, by themselves as the only infant toddler specialists, so really connecting them to other supports. We have gone through the Teaching Pyramid Infant Toddler Observation Scale, the Tippy Toes certification training. A lot of them have certification trainings in other scales as well. So when they're doing those on-site consultations, they can pull from that knowledge and support providers in those. And then the 0 to 3 critical competencies training of trainers and coaching has been huge. It was through the ELD and the work of John and Dana, translated into Spanish as well. So we have providers across the state receiving that in English and in Spanish. And then trauma responsive care for infants and toddlers and childcare training of trainers. This is a new one that we're just wrapping up right now. We've had about 50 people go through, and this was really special in my mind because we did a English language cohort for the trainers and a Spanish language cohort. And so the trainers got to choose which language they would prefer to go through it in. And there was a lot of networking and support wrapped in around that. And so that was really neat. I was a part of both cohorts, and it was a great learning opportunity, and something that I believe is really necessary for providers in our field right now is to receive this training. And so now we have, I believe, over 50 people in our state trained to deliver this training to specifically for infants and toddlers around trauma. We're looking to the future, providing 0 to 3 critical competencies training of trainers again, as we've had turnover in the infant toddler specialist role. And so we really want to make sure that that training continues. We're looking at a relationship-based care training for trainers as well, and then more practice-based coaching trainings moving forward into this next year. And then the last slide is just some pictures that I wanted to highlight quickly for you guys. They may be small on your screen. The first one with the colorful bags is in our Multnomah County cohort created emergency bags and did trainings around emergency preparedness with the providers there who didn't have any of this stuff before. As a part of participating in these networks, they get participation funds and incentive funds. And so they're supported in kind of using those funds as well. The second picture of the orange bags is from one of our Spanish language 0 to 3 trainings that was provided in Marion Polk Yamhill. They've had providers engaged and gone through the whole training, which is, I can't remember how many hours of training, but it's a significant number of hours of training to get through for these providers. And they've all been really engaged in the process and very grateful for the opportunity to go through it in their native language. The third photo is a picture of a little table, and this is another example of some of the environmental supports that have been incorporated as a part of the incentive funds for participation in the family child or the focused childcare networks. And a quote from one of the provider that this center comes from, she said, "After participating in this network, I made our center a container-free environment and discontinued use of bouncers, swings, etc. I implemented what I learned from the trainings and the network, and I created process art versus product art. I've started recording student observations to share with families. I've begun tracking child development, and I increased my awareness around developmental delays in EI, which are all things that we hope for in high quality care environments." Then the other environment photo is just another example of our incentive funds that the infant toddler specialists support providers with looking at their environment and seeing how to use those. This provider got rid of a lot of plastic, older plastic things, and was able to buy wood cribs, which was a big deal, and incorporate, again, more natural environments. Then the photo of their certificate there is from Rogue Community College Infant Toddler Enhancement Certificate, and our infant toddler specialist was one of the teachers for that, as well as supporting providers going through it. And it was where providers could, at no cost, earn 12 college credits and what they called an infant toddler enhancement. And 17 folks completed that requirement in that community, which was a large number. And the last picture is just another example of incorporating messy play, something that one of our Lane County infant toddler specialists is really passionate about and has supported providers in creating outdoor environments for kids that work year round, especially for infants and toddlers. That can be quite a challenge. And that's something in her network that they've really done some amazing things around. So thank you so much. And I apologize for talking very quickly, but I wanted to fit it all in. And I will pass it over to my colleague, Michael.
Hi, I'm Michael Connor. I work with John's team, and Remy messaged me that I have just 2 hours. So, what's that? 6 minutes? Okay, let's go. I want to talk a little bit about the coaching system work that we're doing, and go to the next slide, please. So we believe that the workforce as described in Raise Up Oregon is sort of where we're trying to develop systems to get to. That folks are qualified, they have the preparation and the background that's needed to do high quality work, that they're effective in the work they do, that the workforce is diverse and well compensated. And so we've applied those terms, those ideas, those big markers to the coaching system, those who are coaching early educators in our public pre-kindergarten programs. Next slide, please. So among the objectives, I won't read them, but we're trying to think about, okay, well, what do these big ideas mean in practice? We've recognized that we haven't very often prepared those who are coaching early educators. We've often elevated great teachers into coaching positions and kind of said, go coach. And that's not enough. We recognize that coaching is a craft that relies on a lot of support, a lot of modeling, a lot of feedback, a lot of preparation, a lot of study. And so we're trying to think about, well, what are professional development systems that will allow people to move into a place of proficiency and even expertise in coaching early childhood educators. Next slide. In order to do that, we have a partnership with the Early Learning System Initiative at Oregon State University, where they've hired a number of mentor coach outreach coordinators to work with our coaches in early childhood education in our public pre-K programs. Those mentor coaches then provide communities of practice. They provide one-on-one meeting with coaches in Preschool Promise and OPK. They facilitate trainings or make sure that trainings are happening. And then they're giving us a lot of feedback as we continue to develop the system that we're putting into place. They have their own framework, which you can see some of the important markers there. In terms of how they work with coaches, they spend a lot of time thinking about, well, what does it mean to mentor somebody who's a coach and in early childhood education, and what are the values and commitments that they have? And that work is very deliberate and intentional, and I think it's also developing, evolving, like a lot of good systems. Next slide, please. One of the big questions is, well, what does it mean to be an effective coach in early childhood education? We didn't make up things out of our ears. We started with a number of frameworks, including the Head Start Performance Standards, which identify competencies for coaches. As you all know, Oregon Pre-Kindergarten, our largest program by statute, follows the Head Start Performance Standards. So starting with the Head Start qualifications and competencies for coaches makes sense. But those don't always provide us a great deal of direction for implementation. For example, one of the competencies for Head Start coaches is that they communicate well. Sure, that's a good thing. We wouldn't want to not communicate well, but that's the whole standard. That's what it says, communicates well. And so really fleshing that out, well, what does that mean in practice? What does that mean in relationships? What does that mean to collaborate with people? That's what we're doing. And so we've landed tentatively on these draft competencies. These are big buckets, but they speak to the discrete skills and qualities that we need coaches to have. And then we also need them to integrate those and use them in lots of different ways with early educators, either individually or in groups and so forth. Next slide, please. We're also developing a tiered coaching certification, which can sound a little scary, but it's really a professional development system that helps people get recognized for being qualified and effective in their work. The first tier recognizes that we haven't always done a great job really onboarding early childhood coaches to the work that we're asking them to do. So that first tier is really just, what are the common ideas, the common language that we have for coaching? It's an understanding. If you're a Bloom's taxonomy fan, and you should be if you're not, it's that first level of knowing, appreciating, understanding, so forth. That second tier is around proficiency, and that means getting recognized for doing these things in practice. We're building a thing that we like to call the don't call it a portfolio, where coaches could demonstrate, oh, I'm able to do this in practice. Doesn't mean I do it perfectly. It doesn't mean I do it every time, but other people looking at my work and say, look at that, you are using data to help teachers improve their practice. You are using culturally responsive coaching practices in your work with early childhood educators. And then that third level is, well, how do we get to somebody who's ready to mentor new folks who are new to coaching? that's the system that we're building, and we're planning to pilot that first tier this fall. Next slide, please. A little bit of the timeline and implementation here. Lots of consulting. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody wants to weigh in, especially Angie. So we're working on that, and but that's a little bit of sense of sort of who we're consulting with and how we're giving iterations of the work we're doing with Elsie. And with that, I'll stop. Thank you.
Chair Buckley and members of the council. Yay, I unmuted myself, so I'm off to a good start. For the record, I'm Ashley Michaels, pronouns they, them, and I am the Spark specialist at the Early Learning Division. So I'm here to provide you with a Spark redesign update. And even though Liz said she apologized for talking fast, I'm going to probably talk twice as fast. I have a lot I want to share with you all. As John mentioned earlier, Spark is Oregon's quality recognition and improvement system, and it is critical to the success of Goal 1. So we feel that completing the redesign will enable Spark to do what Oregon really needs it to do. Next slide, please. Yay, it's responding. Okay, so this is current Spark, just a few bullet points. What I want to highlight here is that when it was originally created, it was designed as a quality rating and improvement system, and we recently dropped that, technically we didn't drop the R, but we replaced rating with recognition. But what I want to say about these QRISs that were designed nationally is that a primary goal of these systems was to increase positive outcomes for children. But research has found that normative measures that are usually used within those QRISs, those normative measures of quality, don't consistently or significantly predict positive child outcomes. So that's a problem, and that's on a national level. So also, unfortunately, depending on how the QRIS was designed, if it included any kind of high stakes testing, it can actually increase inequities and widen the gap instead of increasing quality across the early learning system. Next slide, please. The good news is that nationally, the shift is moving away from an emphasis on measuring or rating, that's the R in the QRIS, and they're actually moving towards a focus on quality improvement. And you could see that even in John's slides, where we're really focusing on continuous quality improvement. And this aligns with our redesign vision to create a system that provides fair access, opportunity, and advancement for all. So right now, I can't say exactly what the redesigned Spark or Spark 2.0 will look like. We still have a lot of collaborative planning to do, but I can say what will guide our work. Now, those 4 green boxes across the bottom, you can consider that our design foundation or framework. We really want to make sure that we create a system that shows in many ways that we value diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And one of the many ways that we plan to do that is engage diverse partners all throughout the design process. And specifically, we want to engage educators and families that are most often oppressed by inequitable systems. So we don't not only want to make sure they have a seat at the table, but we want to move the table to where they're at so that we can co-design a system that works for them. We're excited to include key partners, families especially in this redesign process, directors, educators, and all program types, as well as our amazing early learning community partners. We want them involved in this redesign process that will be centered on equity. So those 4 white boxes across the top, I guess you could call those some of our Spark goals. We really want Spark to be responsive. And what we mean is we want it to be responsive to those key partners. We want it to be responsive to their cultures, beliefs, languages, needs, what their own goals are, right? And part of what we need to do with the redesign is identify what some of these different users of Spark, what they need and want, and how it can support the work that they do, or how it can support their family, right? How it helps them. We want it to be responsive to new research and practices, make sure it's flexible. We want it to be responsive to family, program, and state goals. And I see this as a wonderful opportunity for us to unite around shared goals for children. And that's also why I'm advocating for us to explore, keyword is explore, shifting away from Spark standards and moving more towards optional goal sets. What I mean, so a possibility here is that say, a program at the beginning of the year. We'll work with families to identify goals for their children, and then those goals can be addressed within the program's annual quality improvement plan. That's just a possibility, right? We want to explore ideas like that. The next box is connected. We see this as an opportunity to really help Oregon meet that goal number 3, to have the early learning system be aligned, coordinated, and family-centered. So we're going to work to connect to other Oregon early learning systems as appropriate, of course, and then to early learning standards. Make sure that what we're asking programs to do is connected to the other Oregon early learning standards and practices and supports that Oregon has already adopted and are embracing, some of which John was included in those little bullets, and we can certainly come back and talk more about those in depth, but just a few to highlight are Oregon's early learning standards. Make sure that Spark aligns with that and with the early educator competencies. Just a few things but importantly, we want it to align to what we decide are our inclusion and culture responsive goals, right, for our programs. And I see this as a starting place for our goal sets. And then as we gather more information about family and program needs and goals, we can expand or modify our approach. The system needs to be responsive, right? So the next is supportive. We really, really want to make sure that our system empowers Spark participants to select goals that are meaningful to them. And then we focus on providing them with the necessary supports to achieve their goals. And there's plenty of different ways we can do that. I don't have time to get into some of the possibilities, but one thing I want to highlight is that we need to be sure that we personalize resources to the needs of individuals. That's how we'll make sure the system is equitable. Continuous, that's a huge, huge thing here that we're trying to emphasize. Instead of having a Spark rating, many programs would get their rating and then they'd kind of check out. We don't want that. We want programs to be more focused on these continuous quality improvement cycles. And a part of that will definitely include recognizing their efforts and showcasing their positive outcomes that they've achieved. But we also need to make sure that our system is participating in those CQI cycles and we are being responsive to the data that we collect. Next slide, please. So this brings us to the tentative timeline. So next month, we hope to get that contract set up, or I guess into the works, I guess you could say, for a Spark redesign, getting the redesign recommendations report. So starting in November with those contractors, we'd really like to start our engagement with key partners and families. And I'm not saying that's only when it happens, right? That's just when it begins, because we want to engage the partners throughout the process. In March, we should have that redesign recommendation report. And then the bulk of the work for developing, integrating, testing, and implementing would happen between April and December, with a launch in January of 24, which will be likely a phased launch. But with that being said, that's concludes the Spark update. Thank you for your time, and I'm going to turn over to Sydney Train. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Chair Buckley, members of the council, for the record, my name is Sydney Train. I am newly in the role of the higher education analyst at the Early Learning Division. And I want to share with you a little bit of the work that we're doing in higher education now. So we're really focusing in on access, equitable access, and opening pathways for early educators. And a few ways that we're doing that are through apprenticeships, which support our workforce to earn and learn at the same time, and also really supports our professional development best practices of immediately taking learning and applying that into action and really seeing how that works in practice. We're also expanding existing consortium models that we have in some areas of Oregon, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. And working on reimagining the scope of higher education scholarships in terms of the types of degrees that are supported and what kind of wraparound supports are covered. So looking at what the barriers are for students to engage in higher learning and seeing what we can do with financial support to mitigate those. And also to help broaden the view of what an early learning professional's career can be, and all of the different options that can be available to create pathways through a person's career lifetime. Next slide, please. So a little bit more about the consortium model. We have you can see on the map there, those regions covered by consortia models now. We're looking to expand that with 2 different RFA opportunities. One would be planning grants, would be approximately 6 at around 20,000 each. It will really depend on what we hear from the applicants and what their needs are. But that would be to start planning some supports. This is really a collaborative community effort that engages CCRNRs, hubs, higher education, and other community partners to provide wraparound supports for cohorts of students going through higher education. So these planning grants are to start those conversations about what that can look like in the unique community that they're happening. And then we also have some communities that are already starting on this path. They have those partnerships developed. Maybe they have some of the supports in place, and we want to give them some funds to expand that and to continue the great work they're doing and include more students in those opportunities. So I said that these are partnerships, local partnerships specific to the needs of their area. And some of the goals of these partnerships are that we want to really create higher education opportunities that are accessible. So that means not only scholarships, but combining debt-free and loan forgiveness programs. We want to make these opportunities possible by reducing and eliminating the non-financial barriers to success. So I talked about that a little bit on the last slide, but we really want to delve into not just the financial barriers, not just giving money to support scholarships and education, but what are the other things that students need to help them be successful, especially since so much of our students going through are currently in the workforce, working full-time, probably with families of their own. So what else can we do to be supportive of them? We want to really align with the current realities of the world. So considering practicum settings, if we have folks that are already working in the field, can we find creative ways to have their practicum be in the place that they're already at so that they're not having to leave their workplace and lose that income to complete their education? We want it to be efficient, so creating streamlined, articulated teacher preparation pathways, and that's really where that involvement of all of these partners come together. We have one of our consortia that has multiple regions, multiple colleges partnering, and that really has helped the articulation conversation and being able to create those streamlined pathways. Feasible, we want to lessen the time it takes for educators to reach attainment. We want it to be real. We want to value the experience that folks have with college credit and find ways to really acknowledge what has come before and what those students are already bringing to the table. Supportive, we want to use cohort models and mentors to walk hand in hand and help students through this process. Many of the students are first generation students. And so really helping to not only help them understand the coursework, but also the system and the processes needed to navigate that system. We want it to be consistent, really streamline accountability systems, a little bit like Ashley was talking about earlier. We want all of these things in the system to align. We want the work that's being done to align with the NAEYC competencies that Michael talked about, that Elsie is working on bringing in. We want it to align with Spark when that revision comes out. So making sure that when a provider gets into the community after their education and is doing this work, all of these systems are recognizable to them and align with what they've learned. And we want to think bigger, think outside of the classroom, think about technology solutions. In this last 2 years, we have been forced into some opportunities that have really created some new roads and new ways to engage different types of students, rural students, students that are working. And so we want to make sure that we're maintaining the exploration of that and seeing what works best for the students, and be responsive in developing development of student leadership and advocacy, really making sure that with these cohorts, the student voice is heard loud and clear, and there are consistent check-ins on what the students need to be successful. So that's a little bit about what we're working on in higher education right now. Chair Buckley, if we may, the presenters from the professional learning team are available for questions if there's time.
Thanks, Sydney. I think one question just on your last slide came up from a council member in the chat. Did the colors of the different counties mean anything, or was it just a way to identify the different counties?
I think they're just separating the counties. I'm actually not the original creator of that map, but I'm pretty sure it's random.
Okay, very good. Council members, do you have questions of any of the team members?
Yes, Peter, I do.
Okay.
This is Ann Kubish. I really appreciated that so much. It really helped me get a big picture of everything that's going on. My question is about the role of community colleges and how much of, for example, Sydney, you were talking about the consortia approach that you've developed, the role of community colleges in all of this, and should we be thinking more strategically and in a different way about how to be more intentional about bringing community colleges into this process? And what is your what are your insights and your advice from that?
Well, as I said, I'm about a month into this role, so I'm starting to have conversations. We just wrapped up the Grand Articulation Summit, which happens annually. And as part of that, I put out a survey that will be going out a little bit more broadly to get to folks that weren't able to get to that opportunity, and getting some information about building a community of practice that includes some of the folks in community colleges, universities, and others, students, to come together and have conversations about what the needs are, and to really have some intentional input into the systems and give that avenue and venue to have their input on all of these things that we're talking about. Because as I said, we want everything to be aligned. So we really want those community colleges to be strong partners in thinking about what the solutions are. And one thing that is definitely clear is that we need to do some really good communication. We have buy-in from the ECE folks, right? In community colleges and universities. They know what we need. They're all on board. They're all in. They have wonderful ideas. They want to go for it. But we need to do a better job of really explaining, as I mentioned, that path, that career pathway, the potentiality of this role, not only the increase in wages that we're working on overall, but also, you can work towards my job. I started out in early childhood education in a classroom as well. There are places to go with this work. And that's a message that I think the leadership at the universities and community colleges really need to hear to continue investing in early childhood education. I'm not sure if that fully answered your question. So if you have a follow-up, I'm happy to.
Well, and I would just insert just a little bit more around what you had mentioned earlier, Sydney, about those consortia models. And the community colleges are one of the driving units behind those collaborations. And the universities are working with multiple community colleges to really think about how even some of the higher level courses from the university get provided in the community college, and then how things articulate best between them. Just lots of really innovative strategies that are going on, but the community colleges are right in the middle of all of that work.
Great. Any other questions? I have one for Michael. Just when you're talking about the coaching model, can you talk a little bit more about what's kind of the vision of, we get the curriculum for coaches are trained to be coaches. How many coaches are we thinking of trying to get into the system? Is it going to be the point where, for instance, if I have a child care center in a small town, is there going to be a coach accessible to me? What's kind of the vision of spreading coaches throughout the state?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our focus currently is on supporting our public programs. That's where we have priorities around public funds, around vulnerable populations. And we're not there yet in terms of the FTE that's really needed to serve all teachers effectively. Coaches have to make hard choices with their leaderships around prioritizing, around different formats for coaching, where it's group coaching, hiring folks to do the work. It's not like if you walk down to Starbucks, there are a bunch of people with early childhood degrees sitting around saying, I wonder if I could find a job. It's just really difficult to get the staffing we need right now. So I think in terms of long range, of course, we'd want you to have effective professional developments, whether you're publicly funded or not. Right now, we're just trying to get that system in place for OPK and Preschool Promise. And then that's our priority right now.
Gotcha.
And I would insert that the one of the goals within the this coaching, the tiered coaching model that's being put together is that we also have quite a few quality improvement specialists in the system that are teetering or bordering on coaching. They're doing a lot of training, technical assistance, and consultation support. And so that it's an option for them to seek certification in that coaching model and really hone their skills. And they are working with the general population of providers, helping them really get to a place where they're feeling successful, feeling ready to implement higher level strategies, like some of the things that Liz mentioned earlier about one of those providers. But they also are entertaining then possibly going into, applying for some of those public funded opportunities. So we're seeing it as a continuum.
Okay, very good. And so just to follow up a little bit, is it envisioned then that, for instance, if there was a preschool that's not part of Preschool Promise, not part of public funds, could they send one of their people to a training to become a trained coach for their facility?
Well, there are in the world of early learning professional development, there are opportunities like that. One thing I would say is that, and Andy has helped us on this, the Tier 1 certification is open to the public. So that's a foundational certification of like, you know what practice-based coaching is, you can describe it, you know what data use looks like with teachers. You may not be experienced, but you've gotten that foundation. And we wanted to provide that for people who may be interested in coaching, but aren't doing coaching yet. It's like, oh, let's go explore that.
Nice, great. Katie.
I wanted just to point out the correlation that's been going on in my head between Michael and Ashley and some of the other conversations about, and I think that the Sparks program and all of the goals that were mentioned are so great. Coaching is essential. I see them obviously inextricably linked. My question to you both is accessibility and the reality of increasing the numbers of folks that are going through these programs, because already providers go through a lot of hoops just to open the doors. And I hear this a lot from providers that I've worked with in the past. How are we making it actually more accessible to attain the levels of coaching and the levels of quality that Ashley, you were talking about, and not just not reachable. And so what's your pathway to increasing users?
Yeah, that's
or
a great
members?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think originally when Spark was created, in order to get rated, you needed to be in operation for a while. We're not doing that anymore. We want anybody who's working with young children to have access to Spark and to the resources that are built within Spark. So I see that as increasing access immensely, and that we're going to be very intentional about the supports that we provide. So previous, or I guess other states might create, these are the standards, and then you jump through the hoops to say that you demonstrate those abilities. And we're hoping to make sure that all the supports that they need in order to implement some of these practices are there and accessible to them from the beginning, and not saying, hey, now you figure out how to do this, but we are here for you and we're going to support you through the process. The big emphasis is making sure they have support through the whole continuous quality improvement cycle, right? Of setting goals, choosing practices, collecting data on how those practices are going, and then analyzing. So we need to be there to support them through all of that, and not just at the beginning or just at the end, but all the way through.
Exactly.
I think where I would add just a little bit is I think as we're thinking, and accessibility is the big question. I mean, you've nailed that effectively. I think that the strategies are trying to get at when can we do these things that are most supportive, and when you're most available to access them. And we know that providers are working 12-hour days, sometimes more than just the weekdays, sometimes the weekends. So finding time to support them is individualized in some cases. But I think as we are building more coaching opportunities and more quality improvement opportunities, we're trying to go to the providers more, trying to do things in their environment, supporting job embedded professional learning like coaching, but also trying to give them credit for those kinds of opportunities. We're moving towards trying to make sure that they have credit hours that go towards any of these goals that they're trying to achieve from the time that they spend with a coach or that they spend with a quality improvement professional. And so just trying to break down some of those barriers a little bit more, but it's a moving target because the barriers become different as the more expectations come of our providers and programs. So I think the other answer to this is that we need to do periodic check-ins with our provider base to see what's working, what's not, what do we need to continue to amend and change in order to meet their needs. But I really appreciate that you've brought that one up, because that's the hardest thing. There's a lot of responsibilities that they're trying to take care of and juggle.
Any other questions? Well, I appreciate the information very much. And Alyssa, I think we have Gwen is going to jump in here now.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So we've got Gwen here as our program director to give just an update on where we are with program implementation to really complement what you've heard from John and his team.
Great. Welcome, Gwen.
Hello, hi, Chair Buckley and members of the council. I'm just getting things set up here. I thought I had it all set. Let me just think we've got it. And but let's see. I told Remy that, yes, I would handle this, but I need practice. So I thought I was going to handle it well, but off to a good start. So again, hello, thanks for having the time today for a programs update. And I'm here today with my colleague, Dr. Jaya Choles, who's a lead program specialist, and I'm Gwen Bachtel, the early learning programs director. And today, we're hoping to, I know we have less than probably 30 minutes, I think lunch is at 12 today. So today we're going to do a very high level overview of 7 early learning programs that are funded through the ELD. And this is sort of a broad stroke. So I just wanted to, but we wanted to make sure that all of you had some context around all the programs, and we'd be happy to come back at a later date and do a little bit of a deeper dive on any one of those programs. And then we also wanted to give an update on new investments and our expansion progress for this biennium. And then Jaya is going to share some slides about the reach and access for eligible populations of preschool age children. So this will be a deeper dive on that topic. And then we'll wrap it up with some considerations around funding formula revisions and enhancements that we've identified in support of meeting families and children needs in our programs. So that's where we're headed today. So there are 7 state-funded early learning programs, and we included parent education because in early learning, we look at all of our programming as 2-generational. And so it's really important for us to make sure that any of our supports for parents and also children are included as an early learning program. So we're going to focus on the parent education program, Healthy Families Oregon, the Early Childhood Equity Fund, Baby Promise, Relief Nurseries, Oregon Pre-Kindergarten, which is now also has prenatal to 3 programming, and Preschool Promise. And collectively, all of these programs are serving over 30,000 children and families across the state. So in our parent education programs, all 36 counties have access to these programs, and it's an investment of $4 million funded exclusively from the early learning account. We've been trying to change from the Student Success Act into the early learning account language. So you'll see that here, but that is the funds raised from the corporate activity tax. And these are, there are 16 parent education collaborative hubs across the state. And there's one main contractor with this body of work, and that is the Haley E. Ford Center for Healthy Children and Families at OSU. And then for Healthy Families Oregon, we have an annual reach of about 1,800 families. HFO is currently in 33 of 36 counties. We have an RFA in progress for those 2 additional counties. That's out in South Coast, so Coos and Curtis County. And then also we know that Lincoln City is that last one, and we're looking hopefully to be able to reinstate services in that community in the future. We currently have 15 grantees and many sub-grantees though associated with the program. And then with the Early Child Equity Fund, you know, this is a newer program that started in 2020 with the Early Learning Account. And their goal was to reach 2,500 children and families, but they've been reaching over 3,000. So they're having some great success with this model. And the current investment is for 10 million, and they're serving 17 counties. So not full reach across the state at this point with this program. And then for Baby Promise, this program is still in a pilot phase. It's funded through the Federal Child Care Development Funds, or CCDF funds, with an investment of the 8.7 million, currently serving 170 children, but with a target of 250. And these are infant toddler slots. There are 3 communities participating. And when I say communities, it's we're contracting directly with 3 child care resource and referral agencies in those 7 counties shown. And then they subcontract with the local providers for the services. And then for Relief Nurseries, their annual reach right now is just over 2,400 children and families. And they're currently serving in 16 counties with 39 sites. So and you can see here, there's a list of where the services are and where we do not have services right now for Relief Nurseries. And currently we have the 16 grantees. And then Oregon Pre-Kindergarten, this program took 2 slides. There's a lot to go over here. This is our longest standing early learning program with over 40 years of a state investment. This is the Oregon Pre-Kindergarten is modeled after the federal Head Start and Early Head Start performance standards with a variety of different models to meet family needs. And we're currently reaching with our total state investment, just over 8,700 children and families. But when you add in the federal Head Start investment, it's just over 17,600 children. So it's one of our largest, as you can see, programs between the federal and the state investment. And we have 30 OPK grantees, 25 of which are dually funded. So they're receiving a federal Head Start grant as well. And we also have 1 tribal Head Start and the Migrant Seasonal Head Start program in Oregon Child Development Coalition. But then there are 5 of our grantees who are just state funded Head Start or OPK. They're not receiving any federal grants, just the grant through us. And then for Preschool Promise, our current annual reach is at 3,865 children and families. We're now statewide with the last expansion we had at the beginning of the last biennium. And so it's in all counties across all 16 hub regions. And I think a sort of a unique aspect of the Preschool Promise program is that the early learning hubs are supporting grantees with the recruitment, eligibility, and selection of Preschool Promise families, and also working on coordinating enrollment across all of our programs. And then also the child care resource and referral agencies are supporting the grantees with the coaching and program quality supports, as John's team spoke about earlier. And, oops, I'm sorry, I thought it froze up there for a second, but it looks like we're doing all right. And so with our new investments in this biennium, our largest new funds came through Senate Bill 5513 with the policy option 402. And that was an expansion of Healthy Families Oregon, Oregon Pre-Kindergarten and Preschool Promise. But there were some other investments that also came out of regular session and also short session. And that was through some of the work of Oregon Association for Relief Nurseries and also the Healthy Families Oregon Coalition. And so Healthy Families Oregon received an additional $2 million in short session to increase wages and compensation, and also funds to reinstate services in Tillamook and Jefferson counties that were lost due to McPhee funding needing to be moved to a different community with different or higher needs. So we're trying to kind of backfill some of those services there. And then also Relief Nurseries received $4 million. Half of that came at the beginning of the biennium, and then they were successful in another $2 million in short session. So for a total of the $4 million increase for their wages and compensation. And then just a little bit of a deeper dive into the policy option package 402. So the the total package was for 68 million, but 38 of that 68 million was unscheduled, meaning that we had to go back to legislators and give them an update and really explain to them that our programs had the capacity and the interest to support this level of expansion. And we were successful with that. So we do have access at this point to the full funding if necessary for the expansion. So with Preschool Promise, it's an expansion of 2,516 slots for just under 44 million. But a portion of that 44 million, around 5.3, is earmarked for program support. So I think back to Chair Buckley's question around kind of the coaching and how do we, expanding some of that. So we make sure that in our funding formula for some of our programs that we're including those program supports that would support the work of the early learning hubs and also the child care resource and referral agencies, and also contracts with Oregon State University for mentor coaches and for the support of ELSI, so that we can kind of be scaling our programs and scaling the supports at the same time. And then for Oregon pre-kindergarten, the goal was to convert 1,400 part day to full day slots. We've been successful through an RFA process and determining that we're able to, we have the capacity to convert 1,080, not the full 1,400. And then for our Oregon pre-kindergarten, prenatal to 3, there was a request for 263 of those 265 slots. So we felt really good about that. And then for Healthy Families Oregon, there's a commitment there to reach 100 additional families, and mostly through some strategies around workforce stabilization and retention of staff. And so where we're at with this, with our expansion. So as I mentioned, we were successful in having the release of those unscheduled funds so that we have the full 68 million to work with if it is needed. And then with OPK and HFO, the expansion funds will be added into existing grants through an amendment process. And those amendments are already they're in the works and in process. But we have had significant procurement delays. So we're going to keep hoping that we get some movement on those as soon as possible. And then with the Preschool Promise expansion, this requires a competitive request for application. And we're anticipating the release of the RFA in June. The applicants will then have 30 days to apply. And we really, for this RFA, really looked at kind of our mistakes from the last time, I'd say. It was our first time with an expansion of Preschool Promise with providers. In the first implementation of Preschool Promise, we were contracting directly with early learning hubs, and then the hubs were then subcontracting with grantees. And so there was a switch with our last expansion to the state granting directly with the providers. And we heard a lot about how we could make our application process more equitable, more accessible, and we've really tried to incorporate all of those components. And much of that feedback came from a rules advisory committee that convened over a year and a half ago around the appeals process for the last expansion. And wanted to also point out that our this RFA also will include inputs from each of the early learning hubs. They've been doing incredible work with regional sector planning and identifying what are the priority population and also family preferences in their communities for type of provider setting, services offered, and also maybe languages or culturally specificity around those services. So we're really trying to incorporate some of those unique characteristics of each community into the RFA process. And then for the Preschool Promise expansion, this is our distribution plan for all of those 2,516 slots. You'll see these are large ranges, and that's so that we're successful. We want to make sure that if you added up all the top end of this range, we would be over the 2516, but we're hoping to find a happy medium. We need the flexibility to be able to, if in one community there are not enough interested or qualified providers to fulfill the slot allocation, that we have the ability to move those to another community that might have more ready providers available. And this distribution plan, the methodology behind it, and Jaya will be talking a little bit more about that, is we look at what are the current service levels of our OPK and federal and Preschool Promise slots in that community, and compare that to the population of children that would be eligible for Preschool Promise, which is up to that 200% FPL on children in foster care. And then as you can see, we do have sort of a set aside for tribes located within Oregon, and we're hoping to get some more participation from the tribal nations, and making sure that there's always sort of a set aside for those services. So I'm going to turn it over to Jaya at this point. Jaya.
Great. Yes, I am. Thank you, Gwen, Chair Buckley, and members of the council. As Gwen mentioned, my name is Dr. Jaya Choles, and I am a lead program specialist at the Early Learning Division. So as Gwen mentioned, I'll just be sharing a little bit about where we are with our current service levels and how we used them, and some additional census data to help inform the hub distribution plan that you just saw. So displayed on this graph is the current number of publicly funded preschool slots across our Oregon Pre-Kindergarten, Federal Head Start program, and Preschool Promise as of 2021. And this is then comparing it to census estimates of the total number of eligible 3, 4, and 5-year-olds across the state of Oregon. So on the very left here, you can see there's about an estimate of 12,600 slots between state-funded OPK and Federal Head Start. And these programs serve children and families at or below the federal poverty level. And with these current slots, we are able to serve approximately 53% of all of the eligible 3 through 5-year-olds in these 2 programs. So shifting to the middle bar of the graph, Preschool Promise actually expands eligibility to include children and families living at or below 200% of the federal poverty level. So it also adds an additional 3,700 state-funded preschool slots currently. However, because Preschool Promise's eligibility overlaps with OPK and Head Start, but also expands it to include children and families living in the 101 to 200% federal poverty level range, the very far right bar is a graph that shows sort of that total or combined number of children who have access to one of these programs and is eligible for one or more of them. And so this is a little over 16,000 slots, and access is approximately 30% of all eligible children with these estimates. Next slide, please. So as Gwen mentioned, and I'm sure everyone's aware at this point, we're planning for this expansion of Preschool Promise next year that will add a little over 2,500 additional slots, and this will raise access by 5%. So approximately 35% of all eligible children will have access to one of these publicly funded slots. Next slide, please. And so what's important to note, though, is current service levels do vary regionally, and also eligible children vary regionally. And so this was factored into our distribution plan, and one of the contributing factors to why hub regions were assigned the varying projected slot allocation ranges for this upcoming expansion. And so to show you obviously what this looks like, here we have regional access on this map, which is all of Oregon's counties, and we've color-coded them to represent the percentage of total eligible children within each county who currently have access to one of these funded slots. So yellow is showing less than 30% of eligible children have access. And then as you shift to the gradations of darker green, it moves to areas where over 75% of children already have access to one of these publicly funded slots. So as you can see, there's a variety of differences across the counties, and in particular, our more densely populated counties along the I-5 corridor tend to be areas where less than 30% of the county's eligible children have access. And so the goal for this distribution plan was actually to raise all counties up to serving at least 10% of eligible children. And so focusing many on those yellow areas so that's where you'll see where they have the sort of highest slot allocations in the distribution plan. A couple final notes I just wanted to mention briefly about this work and the methodology is that we were very happy and excited to continue the work with census data to get a sense of where resources may be best allocated and to use this to inform the plan. We also factored in Oregon pre-kindergarten service levels into this plan a little bit in order to sort of collectively consider all of our programs. But it is important to note that we used census information on 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, and not all 3 and 5-year-olds are eligible at any one given moment in time. So this is probably a little bit of an overestimate, and we're aware of this, and we're currently looking to become more precise in these methods in the future, but are limited in some cases from the census data that we have available. We also have more information about the specific counties if anybody has any follow-up questions about specific counties. And with that, I will hand it back over to Gwen.
I'm the unmute button. Thanks, Shia, very much for that. Let's see. And it's now frozen for me. Let's see. Might just have to stop share and go back in. Let's see. Let's see if that'll help it. Not sure what John's trick was. Nope, still not. Ah, there we go. Okay, little button clicking there. Thank you for your patience on that. So we wanted to also elevate to the council some of the challenges that are sort of new due to pandemic impacts, but then also some challenges that we've seen kind of growing over the years as we've increased our investments and expanded our programming. And right off the top, some of our challenges, I think many of you are aware, of facilities. There is a shortage of facilities available across the state that are appropriate for early learning environments. And also, and currently though, we do not have any mechanism by which to provide funding for any capital expenditures. We are able to provide some startup funding for some minor renovations to meet health and safety compliance requirements, and also for classroom setups and environmental enhancements, but we're not able to at this time have any type of capital expenditures for facilities. And then we definitely kind of tagging on to Ashley's presentation around Spark and the quality recognition and improvement system. We really need to bolster our supply of high quality ready programs and making sure that those programs are ready to receive state funding and of all of the necessary quality components, and also business acumen for the state funded grants. And then we also want to make sure that the high quality is inclusive of the alignment with priority population preferences for service delivery. And then the workforce crisis, I'll call it, that we have experiencing now, even with our current service levels. And this is not just for teachers and teacher assistants. This is across all aspects of the program. This could be bus drivers, kitchen staff, administrative staff, coaches, and also supports for mental health services and inclusionary practices. So, and then also we're seeing an increase in operational costs. This is kind of across the board, and with additional food costs, increase in gas prices. Many of our providers saying they're not able to provide the same level of transportation services due to the increased costs. And then we also have increased costs around insurance limits and other sort of fixed costs that we call in an operation budget around sort of rent and utilities and those other aspects of a program. So we're seeing these as challenges as just like I said, for current service levels, but also expansion. And then some of the strategies that we're implementing is really looking at in the next session, hopefully legislation and investments for capital expenditures to address the facilities issue. As mentioned earlier, the Spark revisions, and really thinking about how we might be able to fund providers that are transitioning to state grants instead of asking them to be ready right whenever they receive a state grant, but is there a mechanism that we can have for some transitional programming into state grants, especially for Baby Promise and the Preschool Promise programming. And then also we really want to increase parent voice and opportunities for parents to tell us how they want services to be provided, the length of service, where, how, when, and also what those classrooms and interactions look like while their children are in care. John and his team already spelled out some of the workforce stabilization strategies, and then also the investments in the early learning system initiative that ensure the coaching and concrete supports are there in place. And then we also have the need to address the agency's capacity around supporting all of these state-funded programs, especially around the design, implementation, and oversight of the programs. And so thinking about how do we scale the agency's capacity as we're scaling the investments in community. And then there's also some strategies around increasing the agency efficiency with the database systems and workflows. We're really excited about DELC. And so that we know that there's a lot of part of the infrastructure for the agency will support some of these and sort of address some of these needs for workflow improvements and data systems. And then, as I mentioned already, our capacity, personnel, and system alignment. So lots to do. Yeah, Katie, did you want me to stop now? Yep. Do you have a question?
I'll wait. I just have some to ask, but Chair Buckley, I don't want to go out of order, so let me know if I should wait. You're on mute.
Go ahead, Katie.
So have you guys considered using mobile classrooms? Gwen, so we're installing 2 separate ones in Deschutes County over the course of the next year or 2. They house 100 kiddos from 0 to 5. They've been manufactured to be retrofitted for the physical inside space needs specific to that. Now, we aligned it with the higher education institution. So this is where we need Colt to jump in, to place it on school property, to leverage Student Success Act or some sort of funding. And I know it's much more complicated than that for the actual construction, but siting it on publicly owned land, hopefully next to a community college or higher education institution of some sort, so that they become childcare learning labs, and you can supplement your staffing with folks who are going through the certification or teaching degree program to lower operational costs. The land is free, quote unquote, because it's on public land, and these things can be picked up and moved anywhere. Their lifespan's 20 to 30 years. And they're all locked and loaded, ready to go to retrofitted, I guess. They're not, they're built originally for this sole purpose. And so just wanted couldn't stand it, had to throw that out there as an idea.
We'll add it to our strategies. That sounds like a great idea. I look forward to hearing more about it. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, that's exciting. And still thinking about just made me realize as we're looking at some of these strategies, really taking into consideration what have communities done already and have been successful. I think that the report that came out about the co-location of housing communities and early learning programs can give us a lot of great examples of where communities have been successful. But to your point, Katie, I think there's more work to learn more. So I'm going to add that to the list. So thank you for that.
Great. Thank you, Gwen.
Yep, just one more slide, Chair Buckley, and then we'll. So from this, as I mentioned, there's just a few steps here that we're working on as we're preparing for next session. Really want to, again, reiterate, engaging with parents and program providers, really identifying what are those service delivery priorities that will influence cost drivers, and then utilizing those inputs for updating our cost modeling to really include some of these bulleted items here that we know we need to sort of enhance in our current cost modeling for our programs, and then also increasing our agency capacity to deliver and provide the oversight for all the hopefully new expansion and new investments. I just wanted to note that all of any enhancements or improvements to our cost modeling would require a legislative process for us to be able to do that. So, thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Great information to have, even though it is a little depressing that we're only getting to 30% of kids who are eligible. There's so many other kids as well. George put a note in too, just a little bit. Katie's describing what LGSD did to support Union County Head Start, which is great. So folks,
just in case, Peter, in Eastern Oregon, that happens in a lot of school districts. Head Start's already asked school districts to give them space or use their modulars, and they either get it for free or they pay a price. And sometimes you have them in the envelope of the school, and sometimes you have them just on the outside of the envelope of the school. but you still, I think most school districts are happy to do that, but the level of communication or the engagement, it's still like a standalone program that's outside of the school, and the schools still do their day-to-day operations. So that level of integration isn't as strong as folks might want it to be at times, because I'll just say it again, each system kind of runs separately. So, but sharing space or finding space, that's a natural inclination if you have the space, at least in Eastern Oregon.
Nice, thanks, George. Angie.
Yeah, Gwen, you mentioned that the RFP for the Preschool Promise expansion is coming out in June sometime, and that is really pushing us close to the start of the school year. So what is the expectation around those that are awarded grants around the timeline of opening classrooms?
Angie, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, we're very concerned about that as well. We would like to, as much as possible, begin services as quickly as possible in the new school year, but also recognize that that might be challenging depending on our delay in getting the application out. So I think we're going to have to take it sort of week by week and applicant by applicant and see what we're able to do once we get to that point.
Thank you. I mean, I recognize that most people that have applied, we're looking for grantees that have the space for this, but they won't be hiring staff until they're confirmed being awarded the grant. So that could be quite a timely process. And I know that's a concern among the providers.
Yeah. Yeah, and what we've seen in the last, I should say, the first implementation of Preschool Promise and also the first expansion is because Preschool Promise is a mixed delivery model, and we're trying to recruit providers who are already serving families who qualify for the program. In that first year of sort of an expansion, some of the providers, it's more of a conversion of the child and family from like parent pay to free preschool services. And so that's what we're hoping, is that we'll have a lot of opportunity maybe with this expansion for some of that conversion to happen, so that it's more of sort of getting families into the program, but doesn't necessarily require that we're building like a new environment. We will, hopefully have some new environments as well, but hopefully that conversion can happen more quickly.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gwen. Thanks, Alyssa, and all your team. Great information. Folks, we're going to go ahead and I'll take a lunch break till 12:36, and we'll see you back at 12:36 for the rest of the meeting. Welcome back, everybody. Hope everyone had a good break. We will get going here and move into our next item, which is on the co-location study. So we have some folks here from Oregon Housing and Community Services. And Rick, are you?
I know Rick, I think we talked about Rick going first, but I just wanted to, before I hand it over to Rick at Oregon Housing Community Services, just also wanted to thank Rick and the team at OHCS for, I think, what's just been a really wonderful collaboration in the work to try to make the idea that I know we've talked about with the council for a long time, the idea of how is there some dedicated funds to support co-locating early learning facilities in affordable housing development. So I also just want to, again, thank the team for that collaborative spirit, but also really think this is an example of the kind of collaborative multi-sector work that I think Raise Up Oregon is really meant to inspire and direct.
Great, thank you, David. Rick.
Thank you, and thanks, David. I couldn't agree more. You stole some of my thunder in my presentation. It's been a joy to work with David and the Early Learning Division on this co-location concept. Couldn't be happier with the partnership and the collaborative spirit. And we have more to go, but so far the indications are that this is going to be a great project, a great joint project. So thank you for inviting me. My name is Rick Ruzicka. I am the Assistant Director of Planning and Policy in the Affordable Rental Housing Division at Oregon Housing and Community Services. I'm here today to talk to you about co-location. I've been doing a few of these presentations, and so I feel like I'm kind of at home. I'm kind of singing to the choir for once, I think. And so instead of trying to convince you why this is important and why we need money, I think it's probably more just kind of telling you where we're at. But I'm going to go ahead and kind of give you my normal spiel, and I apologize if some of this is stuff you've already known and talk about and that kind of thing, but just it's a little easier for me in terms of presentation to kind of give you what I'm kind of telling everybody. So the kind of co-location pilot program that we're developing is really in response to HB 5011. OHCS, working closely with Early Learning Division, was asked to put together a study on kind of the benefits, the feasibility, and the barriers associated with co-locating early childhood education centers inside of affordable housing complexes. So what does that look like? Can an incentive program be put together? So in response to that, we didn't feel like we had the knowledge of the childcare sector. And I think in talking with David, I don't think they felt like they had the knowledge in affordable housing sector. And so we felt like, we need a third party to do this. And we ended up going out and having the Low Income Investment Fund, or LIF, put together a study for us. I've put the link into the chat, so feel free to peruse through that. And a report was put together, and that was presented to the E-Board, I believe, in February. As you know, the need for ECE and affordable housing is tremendous throughout the state. Based on our conversations with David and his team, I think finding locations for ECE sites, this seems to be kind of one of the biggest challenges that you folks face in making sure everybody has a good quality early learning education. The co-location concept basically ties together our developments that we're going to build anyway to try to meet the affordable housing need with the concept of putting early childhood education centers within those complexes. So obviously this would benefit the community, but it would also benefit the folks that are living in our complexes, is the theory. Currently, as you know, there's no dedicated state or federal funding for ECE operations to utilize for supporting facility development. So the money that we get to build facilities seems to be kind of a good match. Further, child care providers are not development experts, as you know. Introducing them to developers and providing technical assistance and TA dollars to make co-location happen seems like a great solution. So that's what the concept's built around, but there are challenges, and the study talks about some of those challenges and provides us a great roadmap for how maybe we can move forward and eliminate some of those while we set up this incentive program. How co-location typically works is there's kind of 3 different avenues. One of them is to be placed inside of a new construction building. And so I think that's probably one of the more typical avenues we'll look at going forward. But we also have preservation and rehabilitation dollars. And within those dollars and developments, as maybe we're purchasing housing that's already existing, or maybe rehabbing a current facility, there's the possibility of placing ECE facility in there. And then kind of the third way I think that this co-location structure would work would be to improve a current tenant housing development or unit and retrofit that for an ECE facility. So maybe not doing rehab, but maybe just refitting some space that's already there. The biggest barrier to this, is with generally everything, is cost. Affordable housing construction is expensive, and it's getting more and more expensive all the time with the current economic conditions. Adding another facility within that development is going to be costly to our contractors, and there's some barriers associated with that. So it's not just the actual expense. In some cases, if they're using, for example, our tax credit program, they can't use tax credits for that facility. In some instances, it's kind of complicated, and we won't get into that. So it can be a very costly expense, and it can trigger some additional cost for them, like prevailing wage rates, and that's something that the study hits on pretty hard. Additional things it's complex. ECE facilities are complex, nuanced, and expensive construction projects that regulations often unknown to housing developers can cost between $40,000 and $60,000 per child to complete. And most of our housing developers aren't familiar with those regulations and what that world is all about. Early care and education business models are difficult. ECE operations are underfinanced and often have difficulty finding capital to expand. They often must patch together various public and private funding streams to enroll children, especially those from low-income families. And so that's another barrier. And then finally, just connecting the two and providing technical assistance is a barrier. So both housing developers and ECE providers need significant technical assistance to help make connections and navigate complex legal and regulatory environments. But few, if any, organizations are capable of matchmaking and providing TA across 2 historically disconnected sectors. And so that's why the study really recommends that we look at basically hiring a third party to manage this program and to provide that technical assistance. And just as important, the money that we would be providing, the state would be providing to this third party, they see as kind of seed money to go out and try to leverage that for philanthropical dollars and or local government dollars, and also maybe reach out to other finance institutions or that particular finance institution to help add on to the stack for loan dollars and things like that. So the CARE framework, which I've kind of started getting into, is to establish this third-party program and this investment manager, which is likely going to be a community development finance institution, because they're kind of uniquely leveraged in the community to understand community needs, but also have the availability to get those additional resources and layer those on to the funds that we would provide. And they have the unique ability to understand both programs and how they would work with one another. upon receiving proposals, so we're in the process well, first we're in the process of trying to convince the e-board to release the funds to us. If they do release the funds to us, at that point, we will put together a request for a proposal to look for that third party. And upon receiving those, we will review those with ELD and evaluate submissions and determine the proposal that best aligns with the goals of the program. We would then contract with the awarded CDFI to distribute the funds and fundraise the public and philanthropic dollars. The CDFI would be able to leverage these dollars, local contribution and private investments to expand that original investment. And that's a big selling point that we've tried to really make sure the legislature understands, that we're not just using their dollars, we're expanding those dollars with this program. Once they've had the opportunity to fundraise and establish contacts throughout Oregon and make partners aware of the resource and provide the technical assistance, they can begin incentivizing the co-location process. And again, this is an incentive fund. It's really designed to provide both kind of stack grant or loan funds with grant funds. So a lot of the folks out there that would potentially utilize these ECE dollars have had historically problems receiving loans, and so this would be easier for them to receive loans. And if the loan dollars aren't enough, then they could layer those grant dollars on top of those. So they see those two funds kind of working together. Kind of the third stack of that would be a grant program that would help folks that currently run childcare facilities and maybe just need a little bit of money to improve the facility or expand the facility. And so kind of those are the three different layers of kind of incentive dollars that we see happening. And so, yeah, so our next steps at this point are to put this RFP together after hopefully we receive these e-board dollars and secure that third party. So that's kind of where we're at in the process. I hope I didn't go through that too fast or too slow. David, do you have any things that you need to clean up with what I did there, or any other thoughts or suggestions?
That was really super. I may have missed this, but did you mention that I think it's 10 million that the legislature has allocated to start this fund? So it's actually a pretty great, certainly not the need we have in the state, but really a great seeding and start. The other thing I would just note, which is really echoing what Rick has really said, the report's 80 pages long, but I do recommend it highly. I just also want to praise LIF, as Rick was saying. They really did a fabulous job of bringing simultaneously an affordable housing and an early childhood lens to the report. And it's really great to see both those sectors so well represented in the report. They did lots of interviews with providers, Head Start programs, R&Rs across the state. And there's also some really lovely case studies that I think help understand what this feels and looks like on the ground.
Yes, thank you, David. And I would also add that, I think this is something else I've been kind of telling at the presentations. I think we went into this, our group, OHCS, is, we've had so much on our plate and so many dollars, and we're expanding quickly. And so, kind of most of the veterans there are doing a lot of the work. So it was like, oh, this is one more thing for us to do. But, as we really dug into this, it was like, well, wow, why weren't we doing this sooner? Why hasn't this program happened already? And so our OHCS has actually included another $20 million ask into our budget next biennium. And so this is something that we would really like to expand upon. We see a lot of great possibilities with this. There are some barriers that both David's group and our group need to continue to work through. So for example, one of the things that we need to do is we need to incentivize this through our qualified action plan, which is our low income housing tax credit kind of Bible, for a lack of term, or guidelines. And so if we provide points for this, then then our developers are going to chase those points, and they're going to look to add ECE facilities. So that's like one of many examples of things that we need to do in addition to setting this program up. But we intend to do that, and we intend to try to knock those barriers out as best we can one by one as we move forward. And with that, I think I'll open this up for questions or thoughts.
Katie.
You knew I was going to comment on this one. So, yay, 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 and duh at the same time.
Yeah.
It makes so much sense. So I work for the Ben Chamber in my day job. And we have two initiatives that work side by side. One is for workforce housing, the other is for more childcare for the workforce. So I've been working with several developers that are moving into Bend, trying to make it pencil for not affordable housing, but just regular housing. How do you actually pencil out childcare embedded? And it has failed. It has failed over and over again until we started looking at in-home childcare. And what I mean is you build new or retrofit, and you make some of the units larger than others. You use your MUPT or whatever credits, that's probably not a word everybody knows, multi-unit tax credits to do lower, like 30% or lower than AMI housing, and you couple that with the childcare. It's an efficient use of space. You meet your MUPT requirements, and they started to pencil out. So there are two developments going into Bend right now with that model. So yay on your part. I think this is awesome.
Thank you.
And Katie, it's really exciting to hear about those examples. I think if you in the report, I think they also did look at and think about how you not just think about a center, but also those family childcare opportunities and affordable housing. So I think that is part of the landscape that they were thinking about in the report.
Any other questions for Rick on this? So Rick, I just get a question. Do you have some legislative champions for this? Are there particular folks in the legislature now that are really excited about this?
Well, I can tell you this. I've been on a little bit of a legislative tour to try to make sure that we have the votes on the e-board, and it feels like everyone is supportive of it. I haven't ran into one person that has said, I think this is a bad idea, or I wouldn't support this. So I feel like the momentum is there. Now, as they're making difficult budget choices with our budget, when we come to ask for that additional 20 million, will this be a casualty? I don't know, but it feels like the $10 million is not going to be a problem at this point.
Very good. And Katie's volunteered to be on the list to advocate in the legislature for you.
We love it. We take as many advocates as we can get.
And I assume that there's interest in all parts of the state, because all parts of the state are facing the same sort of crisis.
That's what the report really, I think, laid out, was that, as difficult as it is in urban settings, it's even more difficult in rural settings. And so I feel like this is just a statewide issue. There's a lot of momentum with it. There's a lot of, preschool for all going on, for example, in Multnomah County. And so this really is, I think it's the right time to strike at this issue too. So, and we've had conversations with them, and there's things we can do together, things like that. But I feel like the entire state is galvanized around this issue, and it's a really good time to move something like this forward.
Nice. Well, I appreciate the presentation, Rick. And if there's no other questions, we'll just wish you best of luck with all the work. And David, thank you both for working on this and moving it forward.
Thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And thanks, David. Bye-bye.
So we're a few minutes early. I think Khalid's going to join us at 1 was the plan, I believe. And Carrie's nodding her head on that. I don't know if everyone had a chance to actually read the email that Khalid sent this morning. She wrote to her staff concerning the shootings in Texas and in Buffalo as well. If you haven't had a chance to read that, it's definitely worth reading. So we have about 5 minutes here before she'll join us, but I'm believing that we could probably at least tee up the discussion concerning the outreach to the listening sessions that we did. And Carrie, would you be kind enough to just kind of give a summary?
Yeah, I can do that. And I have a few slides that Remy will share after the meeting that kind of gives the summary of where we've been, in addition to the materials that you received in your packet. So just as a reminder, I always like to go back to goals, that the Early Learning Council set goals for your listening sessions that you conducted this fall. And one was to really listen, understand, and learn about families' goals for their young children. And in the context of those goals, what's working, not working for them, what exists, what does access to those that support what they want for their young children's growth and development. Really to develop experience with populations and groups that experience inequities and disparities, with an increasing focus of the council's role in institutional and structural barriers that families face, that we're really trying to impact through our Raise Up Oregon and the systems building that you're doing across the 5 state agencies that are also represented on the council. And to really also think about the lessons learned for the kind of policy changes that you're advocating for, but what also might not be on your radar that are very important to families. So we visited the Josephine Jackson counties twice. One was a rural Spanish-speaking migrant farm worker and immigrant population, including the Medford area, and the other was rural white and included the Phoenix and Talent communities. And then we also did one with Multnomah County, focused on the urban Black population in Portland neighborhoods, and that there were mothers and fathers in all of them. For the Multnomah County, it was all mothers. They obviously had children of all ages, but all had children who were between infancy and age 5. And you see on the right-hand side, the very kind of high-level general questions that we asked the families during the conversation about what was important to them, what are they using, how do they get information, and then if they were governor, what would they do to help young children in their community, which they loved that question a lot. So what you received in your packet was all the quotes from all the sessions, and we organized them by the social determinants of health. And these are the themes that we use so that you can kind of see where families were expressing comments on kind of similar, instead of similar experiences, just kind of on this similar topic. So you could see the range of comments that families had. What we did with those quotes is we pulled together a cross-sector team, and we put them through a 3-meeting process arc that Peter and Kali participated in, as well with Sue Miller. One was to really look at the quotes and start to identify root causes and where were there actions that could be taken at the state, regional, local levels, right? We just let the families talk, not worry about what exists at which level of change. Our second meeting was for those things that were identified at the state level. Well, where were there programs, initiatives, or where did state agencies have a role or responsibility? And then meeting 3 was to start the initial ideas for state level actions. We took that information, and when we were thinking about state action, Bill gave some guidance to the team of what are the kind of most common ways that state agencies often take action to try to eliminate barriers or kind of promote the access to their services and support. So you can see here that there's really the we have the right policy, but it's really the clear interpretation and implementation of it. Actually, the policy is creating a barrier, and so there's ideas around modification. There can be how are practices being done, so it's okay in kind of the policy work, but where are we supporting the policies and our practices and how they're monitored? Where are we constantly doing, like there are a lot that comes up earlier in our conversations today of supporting the workforce and leadership. And then sometimes in some states, these kinds of processes will identify an opportunity for legislation. So this is just to give you a picture of what we didn't give you, a very multi-page document, but what I wanted you to just see is that The work group started with the quote and then identified root causes in the quote, and then started to brainstorm where were there specific ideas, and then started to create ideas of who we needed to talk to. So I wanted to just give you the sense of the breadth of the kind of information that we've collected and started to kind of process with what the families in these communities shared with us. And that we then took that information to the RUAC team to really look across the quotes and where the brainstorming ended, because the ideas were kind of in buckets, but it wasn't like increase this or we have to modify this. How do we really think about the kinds of things that were flagged in this? And so what you got in your packet of kind of the summary idea was that the RUAC members really reflected where could the state agencies participate in the feedback loop, specifically with the communities, to address specific things that they saw families raise there. The second one is really what they saw in those quotes and ideas of like what they're hearing across the state. So kind of statewide strategies, and you will see in the text that a lot of them talk about continued barriers at the state level and things that need to be addressed. And I think a lot of those won't be surprises to you and that are already kind of in the works of work that people want to take on. And there's some that where they were like, oh, there's some opportunities or some positive things that happened during COVID that have turned into permanent changes that we should flag and make sure are working right in communities. And then the state agency started a conversation amongst themselves that their community and family engagement process, their goals, where they're taking this work is in a different place now than it was when the early learning council started that conversation. So there's some ideas about how we might pull together the leaders of the different state agencies who are involved in thinking about the community and family engagement, because where would the coordination and how do we hear what's already being collected from families? And how could we better use that information instead of like, there's lots of concerns about hearing enough from families all over the state and then not overburdening them at the same time. So this is an example of the first page from the document that's in your packet, where you see that each partner is going to, how they're going to participate in the feedback loop with us, and then where they saw implications for broader statewide strategy. So that's the whole document, and the partners from the state agencies are kind of listed there for you to see. So I think we wanted to have a discussion about thinking about any ahas you had from there, initial ideas you have for the opportunity for the council. And then I just want to say that next steps that we have right now, but part of our conversation could include other next steps, is to do the feedback loops with the communities and involve the state agency partners who flag themselves as interested in doing that. Include this data and this information in our analysis as we prep for Raise Up Oregon 2nd edition. And then Peter reached out to Connect Oregon that we can also talk about in a few minutes.
Thank you, Carrie. Boy, that's I don't think when we started this process, we thought it would quite go in the direction that it's gone into, but I appreciate all the effort that's been put into it. Any questions from anything that Carrie covered in terms of
putting these slides back up too that you want,
if necessary? It was very interesting to participate in the conversations we had here in Southern Oregon with the families. There were several themes that still stand out for me, in that there's a lot of kind of systems distrust that did come across. People are a little bit skeptical. In fact, the Connect Oregon folks who I invited here are dealing with this. Connect Oregon came up as a part of the discussion with one of the family groups saying being able to access resources and be referred into resources in a way that's consistent, and that they wish they could have a way to be referred and not have to continue to go to different agencies and tell their story several times, et cetera, et cetera. And my comment when that came up in our work group was, well, that's what Connect Oregon is. And Khalid had not heard of Connect Oregon, and Peg and Katie and George and Angie, I'm not sure if you've heard of Connect Oregon or if that's part of the work that you're doing now, but we invited Celia to do a quick demo for Connect Oregon, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. We all at least understand that this is a resource that was asked for by the families, and we just want to make sure that we start to get the word out to families that this does exist. So yeah, if you're willing to give us a little demo, we're happy to welcome you here, and thank you for your time.
Hello, I'm both the phone number and the screen, just so you know. My name is Celia Guedes. I'm the Oregon Network Director for Connect Oregon Unite Us, and I'm also here with my colleague Scotty. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Celia. So I'm Scotty. I'm Celia's colleague. I'm our business development director for the Pac Northwest. Been with Unite Us for 9 months, and yeah, appreciate the time today. Just happy to do just a few minute overview of Connect Oregon and some of the great work that's happening across the state. Appreciate you having us, Celia.
Thank you. We normally would do a demo, but we only have about 5 minutes. So I was thinking kind of share about what Connect Oregon is first, and then if you do have any follow-up or questions, we can always continue chatting. And we have, can I share my screen? Would that be possible?
Yes.
Great. So hopefully you are able to see my screen. First, I want to share about Unite Us and Connect Oregon in case you've heard both names interchangeable and wondering what is what. Connect Oregon is the name of our local initiative in Oregon, and Unite Us is the name of our company and the name of our tool. And what we are a technology company that allows all providers, social services, healthcare. Right now, I'm at an educational school district, so educators to connect with one another in order to serve individuals and communities so all needs are met. And also so we have the data to know in real time and not sort of anecdotally only what is happening in our community, who's getting served, and most importantly, what communities are not being served and why. Is it because we're at capacity, or is it because we are learning, for example, now because we are having a really hard time reaching members? Is it because eligibility is too stringent? So really providing kind of that granular data that we need in order to connect folks to the right service at the right time. So Unite Us is nationwide, as you can see, and we have staff all across the country. And something that I think we're particularly proud is that recognizing that this work is both kind of transformative at the country level, but also incredibly local and unique, in that this is not new work that folks are doing, but this work of connecting is the work that connecting individuals to services is the work that we all have been doing, but how can we allow those people that are doing the work to have the right tools to do this work even better. So for Oregon, we are almost statewide, which is incredibly exciting. So we're having a tool that allows folks to send referrals in a more standardized and effective way. And by the end of the year, we will be fully statewide, and our funding partners have been the coordinated care networks in the state. So you can see on the bottom of the slide, we have been in really close partnership with our local CCOs as they're bringing Connect Oregon to the state as a tool to address social determinants of health. And another important piece, not as a funding partner, but a really critical component, is our partnership with 211. When we first started talking about Connect Oregon and the possibility of this tool, folks had immediate questions about the role of 211. How is it that we are different? How is it that we can collaborate? So right now, our partnership is very strong, in which 211 plays the role of a coordination center. So if folks don't know exactly where to refer, to whom to refer, they can refer to 211, and 211 can triage, since they are the experts in kind of knowing what resources. And we also have an ingestion, which means that the resources that 211 has on their database lives and also on the Connect Oregon website. So we're really working closer to making it as easy as possible for CBOs to be able to participate in Connect Oregon, and making sure we're not duplicating efforts. Briefly, before we can just have a few minutes of questions conversation, I want to let you know where we're at with Connect Oregon in terms of services. We have 567 organizations on the network. So this is all across the state. So all these are organizations that have joined the network to send or receive referrals, and they have multiple programs on the network. And you can see to the left all the different services that we have represented across the network. And then from those 567 network partners, we have 961 programs. So an organization will add multiple programs onto the network, or just a few. Some only for sending, some referral receiving. So there's really a true. Each organization can use the network as best fits for them. And I just want to call out that being able to onboard 560 organizations across the state has been a great privilege, and also a great success that all these folks are agreeing to work in the same space in order to connect folks to services. And it's truly a group effort in which we want the network to be as strong as possible so it can support anybody who has services. So a lot of our organizations really have the sort of no wrong door model approach kind of to the ethos of their work, and they want to make sure that if anybody comes through their doors, even if they don't provide that service, they can refer to the right service. So I'm just going to take a pause here just now that you know a little bit about Connect Oregon, if you have any questions, or also if Scotty, my colleague, wants to share anything else.
Any questions from anybody? Or Scotty, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I certainly can. So, as Celia said, been going at this work for, several years now, and the maturity of the network is certainly growing. One kind of really cool, exciting announcements, particularly for this group, is that in our business model, we don't charge any money for licenses for social service providers and CBOs, so food pantries, housing providers, what have you, right? That's kind of what we do. As Celia talked about, our funders generally are CCOs or insurance plans, state and local, state governments and health systems. But one thing that we did just announce is there's this kind of third user in there where maybe they're not a service provider, but we see them as a very critical part to the network because they are a point of intervention. So school districts falls right in there. And we just, and so historically what we've had is this kind of third category users where we want to partner. We offer licenses and we try to come up with agreements to give them like a limited amount of free licenses. We did just make a company-wide decision not 2 weeks ago that we are now going to be honoring all K through 12 entities at no charge, unlimited capacity licenses, because we want them to be a part of this network, because we know how, look, you guys, again, run into a lot of at-risk populations, with our youth, and we want to make sure that we are opening doors for those children to get connected to care. So really exciting announcement on our part. And I fully support it. I think it's the right move. Just kind of getting folks connected to basic needs as our North Star, and having kind of this no wrong door approach that we continue to tout. So I had to share that news, particularly with this audience today.
And a great next step would be to do the same thing for early childhood. I think that'd be great.
Working on it. Yeah.
Any questions? Just to note to the website does have the ability for an individual to seek help in their county, and it's also in multiple languages, I believe. So
that's right. Yeah, 50 plus languages.
Yeah, there's the opportunities if folks want to self-refer if they can, and just something that we are also particularly excited is being able. We've been in some preliminary conversation with some early learning hubs, and I think an area opportunity for us could be being the information on referral tool for Family Connects International. Like we know, well, Family Connects, but Family Connects International, we know that folks are going to be visiting moms and their children, and the folks will need resources. So how can we make that referral a closed loop referral and make sure that folks kind of enter a supportive place of kind of shared case management and just are not sort of dropped off where, here's a piece of paper, or, in this moment of incredible change and stress, please, go ahead and make this phone call. So that's something that we're exploring, and we really hope that we can be a partner in that work.
Well, you got some applause from Peg Miller there. Peg?
Ken, one of the things you mentioned was that sort of distrust of systems. And obviously this is a sharing system. I have heard this presentation before, and I think it's a great, it's going to be a great tool for all of us to use and to help families, again, not have to tell their story a million times, but are you finding, or are people that are using the system actively finding that there is some reticence in signing the ability to share that information?
We haven't heard it from, we haven't heard users sharing experiences from families or participants. I think the families that we work with are used to being asked all the questions, and what they want is that referral to be shared and not having to re-ask over and over. But we are finding that it is the users who want to know that that their information will be shared appropriately. So I think it's kind of a continuing education component, and that folks feel confident acknowledging that adopting a tool will take time, and there's a change management process. So just for us is being really available to answer those questions and honoring that is folks doing their best job.
Peg, that actually came up. The folks from Connect Oregon did a presentation for our Family Advisory Council. It was 18 parents. And their initial response was about half of them said they wouldn't do it because they didn't know the system. They didn't know where their information would be going. But after someone from La Clinica came in and talked about how they use it to refer people, they said, the council as a whole said, yes, if La Clinica says this is okay, then we say it's okay. And they decided that we should recommend that for all the school districts to use as well. So, any other questions for the Connect Oregon folks? Thank you so much for taking the time. I greatly appreciate it, and just want to make sure that we have awareness on the council that everyone has the same information on that. Appreciate it very much. Take care.
Thanks, Peter and team.
Thank you for having us, and thanks for the work you're doing.
Thank you. So again, this is just something that we can bring back to the focus groups that we talked to, saying that this is something that's you've talked about the need for this. Here it does exist. We help spread the word on that. And it's whether the point on the focus groups. I'm not sure. Has everyone heard about Help Me Grow Oregon, which is another program? I'm going to put the link here in the chat. Help Me Grow actually has trained people online. It's a call-in for coaching, for parent coaching, and also access to resources. And if you haven't seen Help Me Grow Oregon, they just kicked it off here recently. We had a couple community meetings on it. But it's a resource, it's up and running. And if you haven't seen it yet, families can access that as well. And then get, again, coaching in the middle of the night. If your 3-year-old is having a horrible night, someone can be on the phone to talk you through it. So I don't know if there's anything else we need to do on the, unless there's a lot of information through at you with the listening sessions. There's a lot of quotes there, etc. I don't know if anybody has any feedback on it. George, go ahead.
I think my only feedback was I've heard of Connect Oregon, but making it, I'll just say, easier for folks to access or hear about it. I don't know what we can do, but I usually think like if there's messages that come out, if they have emails that come out, or if there's things that like start to trickle into, I'll just say our brains of access, opportunities that are there or resources that are there. Even that last one that you just said, like. Yeah. For grow, I forgot how you put it, for the help me grow, right? Help me grow. And imagine if a lot of parents knew that, or just when they're having struggles or they're not sure, and because they've seen so many messages or commercials or different points of information, that it's like top of mind that, oh, if I got problems, here you go. Because I would say, I wind up finding out often that we have lots of resources. We just don't know where they're at, or we just don't know that they're there. And I don't know how we can make that easier, but there you go. There's my
We need to. We need to. Good point, George. Any other comments or questions on the the work that was done around the listening sessions? If not, just thank you again, Carrie, for all the work, all the effort on it. And I think the last thing on our agenda is rules. And Remy, will you talk us through the rulemaking that we must do?
Yes, of course. Thank you for having me. Remy Watts, the Early Learning Council Administrator and also Rule Coordinator. So here I am as the Rule Coordinator today, just to go through a few rulemaking updates that we have going on over the next month. So today and next month. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a vote on the fire safety in family care. You'll remember the temporary rules from January 2022 that we have finally finished in making into a permanent rulemaking set through a lot of engagement. And Alyssa is going to tell you more about that in a minute. Alicia Gardner, our acting director of the Office of Child Care, is unfortunately not able to make it with us today. So Alyssa will be stepping in and there will be a vote with that. And then after that, we're going to move into the notification of upcoming rules. So we've got a few rule sets coming up in June, including the school age center rule set, some central background registry modifications that are going to be temporary, an aid to requirement sunset repeal. Once again, Alyssa will talk more about those. And then we'll talk about the Tribal Early Learning Hub as well, which will come up for a vote in next month's meeting. So with that introduction, I will kick it over to our valued leader, Alyssa Chatterjee, the Early Learning Systems Director.
Thanks, Remy. Appreciate the intro, and I see that Kelly has also joined. So Kelly, please jump in as you've been working on this so closely. Just wanted to give you all the latest on rulemaking, and I'll make sure
which will come up for a vote in next month's meeting.
Yeah, you should be able to stop the YouTube now, Kelly, since you're here with us. All right. If you want to, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was bouncing back and forth between the two things and I missed the question. Sorry.
Oh, no. Do you want to just introduce yourself real quick and then I'll kind of lean on you to jump in with any context I'm missing?
Yeah, you bet. I'm Kelly Scales and I'm a policy analyst for OCC, and I've been involved in most of the RACs and a lot of the rule building conversations. So happy to help if there's questions that Alyssa doesn't know the answer to.
Thanks for being here, Kelly. So as Remy mentioned, we wanted to bring back the fire safety rules and family child care for a vote. So just as a reminder, in April of last year, the Department of Consumer and Business Services, their Building Code Structures Board passed a rule requiring sprinklers in home-based child care facilities. And in January, you and the DCBS board each adopted temporary rules that strengthen fire safety in family child care settings while providing an alternative path to sprinklers. So Remy and Kelly and Alicia and the OCC team have been convening a rulemaking advisory committee to review the temporary rules and see what changes need to be made. So I'll quickly walk you through those rules. So we, based on the feedback from the rulemaking advisory committee or the RAC, aren't changing the requirements around flammable and combustible materials and storage related to that, as well as the emergency safety plan. We also are not changing the written record requirement for when emergency evacuation drills are conducted. So those are staying as is from the temporary rule set that's currently in place. Where we do start to see some changes is here with recognizing that there was a need to clarify this rule. So we've added a new sub 9 that pulls apart the temp rule sub 8 into two pieces. So the requirements are still the same, but we've clarified that as sort of a separate requirement so that it's easier for providers to follow and easier for our licensing specialists to enforce. The next one was looking at smoke alarms and carbon monoxide detectors. The RAC wanted to make sure we clarified that and are accounting for the fact that not all providers have access to all floors of their residence. So we've added some language here that smoke alarms and carbon monoxide detectors must be installed in each floor level of the home unless the floor is not under the direct control of the provider. looking at the next section on fire extinguishers, really looking at what was meant by mounted and obstructed and accounting for providers who don't have access to all floors again. So providing additional clarity on where they must be easily accessible and visible. This is something else that I know was not, as we looked kind of back into the research, felt like this was a better use of what was intended in terms of best practice for fire safety in home-based childcare programs. The next section looks at fire drills. After talking to the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, we wanted to provide additional clarity on when drills must be conducted or observed. So we simplified the language stating that drills must be practiced monthly at various times during childcare operation hours, and that an evacuation drill must be conducted when requested by the Office of Child Care during an announced visit. So that was an important clarification to add. The next section looks at an alert method, as well as the evacuation within 3 minutes. So based on Rulemaking Advisory Committee feedback, we really wanted to have some flexibility in time. So want to reinforce that 3 minutes is the best practice standard. It is what other states require. And we wanted to have that flexibility so that providers can work towards 3 minutes, and that there isn't an expectation that day one, your first time doing an evacuation, you meet the 3 minute mark, but really focusing on what efforts need to be demonstrated to continuously improve that evacuation time. So we wanted to make sure that was very clear again for our providers and for our licensing specialists so that we can consistently apply that expectation going forward. The next one here was really looking at overnight care and hearing feedback on how to illuminate the evacuation route. So we provided a clarification here that the emergency plan for evacuation during the night must include how the route will be illuminated. So giving, again, more flexibility for the provider to create a plan that works for their individual program type. Kelly, is there anything I missed there that we need to add?
Nope, you did great. That was perfect.
Okay. I think I will stop there. Is that right, Remy?
There's nothing that you missed. I just wanted to highlight just a few of the changes that we made based on public testimony, because we did receive some public testimony about this rule set. No one signed up to present verbal, but I did pass along the public testimony to the Early Learning Council. Specifically, there were a few things. So as Alyssa said, the evacuation being under 3 minutes was really something that providers worried about if they can't hit the 3 minutes. The illumination during night care, we originally had it that you had to have night lights plugged in the hallway. That was flagged, like, what if there's not an outlet in the hallway? Is the provider going to have to install an outlet? So that's how we came up with the more flexible language like that. Another one, the mounting of the fire extinguisher was originally out of reach of children. That was very difficult for providers to do, as they flagged for us. We looked at best practices, and best practice for mounting fire extinguishers is 3 to 5 feet off the ground, which is definitely child height, but also best practice. So we got rid of the out of reach of children and made it more flexible in where the fire extinguishers mounted. So I think that's and then the alert method, I wanted to also flag just some of the equity changes that we made. So such as the fire alarm, or the alert method. We originally only had sound methods that were included in the rule set. After doing an equity analysis, we added strobe lights for our providers who may be hard of hearing or deaf. So that's just like one example. And then the other equity, oh, exactly. The evacuation method under
trying to aim for the 3 minutes. Another equity flag was that some of our providers may not be as mobile, may have difficulties in mobility, maybe experiencing some sort of disability. So that's why another reason why we made it. It's a goal of 3-minute evacuation and providing technical assistance to any providers who aren't able to do that. So I just wanted to flag just a few of the changes that we made in response to public testimony and in our equity analysis for the council. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Remy. So I believe we might be ready for a motion. I don't know if one of the members, it's on page 27 in the packet there, is written out motion A and motion B. I believe both are needed because they're amending separate rules. So I'm wondering if one of you folks might be willing to read that off as a motion.
I could do that for you, Peter.
Thank you, Angie.
You're welcome. I'm actually using the attachment that Remy sent this morning, so it's not page 27 of our packet.
Okay.
But, so stop me if I'm reading the wrong thing. I move to adopt the proposed language dated May 25th, 2022 that adopts amendments to Oregon Administrative Rules 414-205-0035, 414-205-0110, 414-205-0130, and 414-205-0140.
Thank you for making the motion. All in favor of the motion, please either raise your hand or let me know or say aye.
Aye.
Yeah. Very good. Motion passes. Angie, would you be up for reading the second one?
Sure thing. I move to adopt the proposed language dated May 25th, 2022 that adopts amendments to Oregon Administrative Rules 414-350-0050, 414-350-0170, and 414-350-0375.
Thank you, Angie. The motion's on the table. All in favor, please indicate yes.
Aye.
And there's, okay, passed unanimously. Thank you. So, Remy, we're going to talk about next month's rules, right?
Yes, and once again, I'm going to kick it over to our fearless leader, Alyssa Chatterjee, to talk about the school age center rule set, the central background registry modifications, and then the aid to requirements.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you. So we have a couple of rule sets we wanted to get on your radar. The first are school age center rules. This is the first rule set that we've adopted specifically for school age children. So as OCC has grown, our efforts to grow consistent really have been a focus. And so we've seen updates to our licensing manuals to be more comprehensive. There's been the creation of strong guidance for field staff to know when to cite and not to cite on serious violations. But as you've created these consistencies, we've noticed some potentially unintended consequences that need to be addressed, really focusing on that human-centered design. So we wanted to name some of these guiding principles that have been a big part of this school age rule set that we've been developing, as well as future rule sets going forward. So the school age rule set that we will be bringing to you all next month, it applies to licensed centers who are serving ages 5 to 12, so that's school age capture. It will be held under certified center statutes, and the requirements under these statutes have not changed. So this school age center would still be certified with the Office of Child Care, and the licensing, renewal, and application process won't change. So we will bring these back to the Early Learning Council next month for adoption, but they would not take effect until January of next year, so that we have plenty of time to both implement the technology changes and help providers kind of understand expectations. But this has been a really exciting body of work that's involved school-based providers, and I think been a great example of how we can partner with the providers offering these services to really drive policies that ultimately are better for children and work well for providers. And Kelly, again, anything you would want to add? I know you've been really shepherding this work along.
Nothing to add. It's been a really fun collaborative effort to hear what they need and to be able to be flexible as an agency to meet those needs. So we're really excited to show providers what we have to offer.
Thank you, Kelly. There are 2 more rule sets we'll be bringing forward for you all. So wanted to note the major Child Certified Center Aid to Modification and Center Rules update. So we are going to convene a work group prior to the RAC. This is the model we did with the school age rules as well, to just start working through the detail with a lot more time and space before the RAC is convened. And so bringing center operators in as we do a certified center rule revision. So a major overhaul there. We'd also previously had on the agenda that we would pass temporary rules to implement the bills allowing recorded programs and license exempt providers accepting subsidy to be in the central background registry. We're moving that to June just to better align our timelines. And wanted to also give you all a note that previously the council had adopted rules for aid to requirements, allowing them to have opportunities for an hour of supervision so that other staff can take breaks if they need to help care for a child. If there's been, a diaper blowout, somebody can help with that child while the aid to watches the other children. So we will be bringing that back to you all to remove the sunset date that had been included, which was that this allowance would actually end on June 30th. So we're going to squeak in at the last minute and get this in front of you on June 29th to remove that portion of the rule. So that is it for me. And then Remy, I know you have some more to share as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to quickly flag for the council, specifically with the school age center rule set. Please refer to the notice of upcoming rulemaking memo in your packet. It's going to be quite lengthy. I don't want you to be surprised. It's a whole new rule set. So it's going to be about 70 pages. And we're clearly working with our external partners on that. So I just really don't want y'all to be surprised when we show up with 70 pages of rules and about 15 rule numbers to read off. So whoever makes that motion next month, get your water handy. But also just really quick, next month, we will also have the Tribal Early Learning Hub rules. The Tribal Affairs Manager, Valeria Atanasio, is unfortunately not here today either. Alyssa and I are both kind of jumping in. But if Valeria were here, she would be presenting this. But just an update on the Tribal Early Learning Hub rulemaking process. We've been working with the Tribal Advisory Committee, which includes our own Angie Blackwell, which is wonderful, 2 representatives from each of Oregon's tribal nations. And we have at least 1 member of each tribal nation on our rulemaking advisory committee subcommittee to the Tribal Advisory Committee. So we went through a couple of meetings and came up with rules that the biggest difference between the Tribal Early Learning Hub rules and what you would see as, the 16 Early Learning Hub system is one of the things that we really were trying to do with this rule set is operationalize culture. So I think that we did it successfully. I'll let you know. We are currently sending the rule set back to each individual tribal government for approval. So our tribal nation representatives will be taking the rule set to their leadership for approval and get back to us. So we're not sure exactly how long that process will take. It might take until June. We might have this rule set up in June. If it does, that's awesome. And if it doesn't, nothing's going to fall apart. The Tribal Early Learning Hub will still be stood up and we'll bring the rules to you in September. So I don't know if I missed anything that, Angie, if you want to jump in and say anything, I don't mean to put you on the spot, or if there are any questions about the Tribal Early Learning Hub rulemaking, I am happy to take them right now.
Thank you, Remy. I don't have anything to add, just that I really appreciate the process. And I think that many of the tribal leaders have been engaged in this, and I think they all appreciate being included and everybody's voice being heard. So thank you.
I'm so excited to hear you say that, Angie. Thank you. Yeah, it's how government should be working. So I don't think we should think we're too too special for that. I think this is the bare minimum of how our government should be operating. And with that, we are going so fast through this rulemaking presentation. I was not expecting, I thought we were going to be running up to the buzzer. And so those are all the rules that you're going to be seeing in June. However, we have one rule set that we wanted to bring to you in June, and I will let Alyssa once again talk a little bit more about why we are pushing that rule set. So Alyssa, if you can give us a quick update on the suspension and expulsion prevention program, and I'm here to back you up if you need.
Thank you, Remy. So we have been convening the Suspension, Expulsion, Prevention Rulemaking Advisory Committee. That's in process right now. And I think one of the things we want to really pause for is where there's kind of broader than ELD impacts. This committee is adopting terms like anti-biased, anti-racist, equity. And we want to make sure that we're taking this opportunity to say, what does it look like in early childhood, and what should it or could it look like in other education settings and across the state? And as we think about adopting administrative rules with such important terms, is there an opportunity to see that alignment kind of agency to agency? We also wanted to make sure there was plenty of time for this rulemaking advisory committee to unpack such really deep and important topics, and felt that pushing this back a bit gave us more time to add additional RAC meetings if needed, as well as have those kind of cross-agency, full enterprise coordination conversations before we bring this back to the council for you to review.
Makes sense. Thank you. Complex, very complex. Very good. Well, with that, I think we're at the end of the agenda, and I just appreciate everybody's time and efforts. Thank you for all the work that you do, and tell Sue that I got you off 19 minutes early. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. Have great days.
Thank you.